All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We really appreciate you joining the second field hearing for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's AI Commission on Competitiveness, Inclusion, and Innovation. My name is Jordan Crenshaw. I'm Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Technology Engagement Center. This is, as I said, our second field hearing as we go throughout the country and internationally to learn about the policies that we can put in place to make us more competitive, inclusive, and also prepare the workforce of the future. We were in Austin 2 weeks ago because Austin is one of the new hot tech markets in the country. But now we're in Cleveland, Ohio. Why Cleveland? Why Ohio? We're in Ohio because Ohio is leading in technological innovation in terms of looking, even if you look no further than the announcement of new semiconductor capacity being built by companies like Intel in the state of Ohio. We're also here in Cleveland because the Cleveland Clinic is also at the forefront of using technology to improve quality of care and outcomes for patients. And we thank the clinic today for hosting graciously as well. But I'd like to start our event today by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Tom Mihaljevic. The doctor actually is the CEO and president of the Cleveland Clinic. Prior to his work here in Cleveland as the head of the Cleveland Clinic, he served as head of the Abu Dhabi branch for the last few years before taking on this new role. Also, speaking near and dear to my heart, the doctor has actually taken up tech as a major part of his portfolio in terms of treatment for patients, has been published over 140 times. And actually one of those papers I think speaks near and dear to my heart, and some of the chapters were written about the use of robotics in mitral valve surgery as well. So we are incredibly grateful for you to host us today, doctor, and the Cleveland Clinic. And like, without any further ado, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm really flattered you did your research, but you also pronounced my last name perfectly, which only few succeed at. So thank you very much to be here today. Actually, I was just reflecting walking here into this conference room. I think this is the first time that I've stepped back into this conference room in the last 2.5 years. We haven't really been using it for an in-person gathering. So the good news is that COVID pandemic at least seems to be giving us a bit of a break so that we can meet in person. And I'm glad that we're meeting in person on such an important topic as AI and computational technology is in general. So I would like to thank the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and all the members of the commission. I think I had a chance to meet all of you, and both Chairman John Delaney and Mike Ferguson for being here today and choosing Cleveland Clinic as one of the sites. For those of you who haven't had a chance to tell a little bit about the place where we're currently at, you're sitting in a hotel that is in the heart of medical campus that takes care of the sickest patients in the world. There's not a single medical facility anywhere that sees a greater complexity of medical care and takes care of very many who have lost the hope for cure than the people who are here under our roof at Cleveland Clinic. Approximately 25 to 30,000 caregivers work here in support of our patients and in our effort to do as much good as possible. Now, needless to say, it's a complex task for a number of different reasons. But one of them is just the proliferation of medical knowledge. On one end, the proliferation of medical knowledge and advancement of science is so impressive that it's inspirational. On the other hand, it is so rapid that it's frightening. So just for reference, in 1980, the amount of medical information doubled every 7 years. And very many of us remember the 80s. Today, it doubles every 73 days. So although we try to read every medical publication that gets published, since there is a new publication in peer-reviewed journals that occurs every 30 seconds, it's kind of difficult to keep up with the pace. So, and aside from just an advancement of science, when it comes to management of really complex conditions of our patients, there's a tremendous amount of medical information that we're gathering from patient medical records, from electronic medical records that needs to be not just gathered, but analyzed and protected appropriately. And then put into the use of our caregivers to adequately steer patients through the challenges of their illness. So at the Cleveland Clinic, we are all about patients. Our motto is to put the patients first, to put them in the center of everything that we do. But what I would like to say is that the future of healthcare, let me take it this way. In the past, we always celebrated individuals who, with their brilliant effort, intellect, and drive, transform healthcare. In 21st century, we will be celebrating the teams that work together, and they're supported by computational technology that will help them advance the science faster. Because of everything that I mentioned, the role of individual is always going to be important. The role of team, collective wisdom, and our computational ability carries an unparalleled importance. And that's why we're so passionate about the use of computational technology in general, but artificial intelligence in particular. And I would like to give you a flavor of a few areas where we're using it already. We are being able now to predict, for example, the certain types of arrhythmias, irregular heartbeat, by using an algorithm that is powered by artificial intelligence. We are discovering an association between the disease that is now touched 60% of us in this audience directly, and that is COVID, and the disease that will touch 1/3 of us during our life, and that is degenerative brain disease, like Alzheimer's, dementia, or Parkinson's. We are using this type of analytical capability also to steer the better use of radiation therapy in the treatment of cancer, and the list goes on and on and on. So our goal is really to use artificial intelligence not just in our inpatient setting in our hospitals, but beyond that, because the healthcare is going to transform in very many ways, but is also going to transform in such a way that the healthcare will be provided in the areas where you're not used to see healthcare being provided. Probably the biggest change is going to be that a lot of healthcare that we will be receiving during our lifetime is most likely going to occur, the healthcare delivery in our homes. The only way to do that appropriately in a coordinated fashion is by using the artificial intelligence in a meaningful way. Another really important use of artificial intelligence in the quality and patient safety. Let's take a look at just the explosion of the needs of imaging technologies, or let's say analysis of pathological specimens. The pathological specimens, meaning the samples of a tissue that we obtain from hundreds of patients every single day on this campus alone, and thousands of patients every single day across our system, are being analyzed by pathologists. In a traditional way, they're looking at the samples under the microscope. They may or may not be seeing the patterns. Our team is tremendously good and have a phenomenal quality assurance. But needless to say, even when the process is done perfectly fine, it requires tremendous investment of time, effort, and manpower, and introduces an opportunity for error. We are realizing that partnering with other companies like the one that we are collaborating with, which is called a Path AI, is going to help us to analyze the thousands of pathology specimens with the use of artificial intelligence in a way that is going to be safer, more effective, and ultimately it is going to be scalable. The reason why scalability of our efforts is so important is because there is a paradox in U.S. healthcare that very few people, in particularly within the U.S. healthcare, are aware of. Imagine, if I were to ask any one of you, obviously I think you will be biased right now, if I were to ask you a question, name the best providers of healthcare in the United States. I would hope that the Cleveland Clinic would make at least in the top 5. But if I were to ask you to guess what's our market share and how many Americans actually benefit from Cleveland Clinic care, I bet you they would be far off with your answer. And the answer is 1.5%. So there's fewer than 2 out of 100 Americans will ever experience Cleveland Clinic quality of care. And I would like to bet that almost 100 out of 100 Americans would love to enjoy that privilege. And it's not just Cleveland Clinic. You can use Mayo Clinic. You can use any of the top 5 reputable organizations. We all have similar market share. You put the top 5 healthcare providers in the United States, our cumulative market share, for the lack of better terms, would be probably 5 or 6%. Why is that so? Because there's no scalability in our efforts to reach many people in need. So the growth of the organizations like ours, and through growth, what we essentially say, the scalability of the good that we can provide in people's lives is imperative, not because it's a business imperative, it is an ethical imperative. The only way that we will be able to do it is going to be by an appropriate use of technology, and artificial intelligence is such an important piece of it. So therefore, I'm so happy to see you here today. And I would just like to highlight another aspect of this joint effort, and that is that we as healthcare providers cannot do this work alone. We need your support when it comes to legislation. We need your support when it comes to public advocacy. And we also need collaboration with other companies that are outside of our primary sphere of healthcare, such as companies in areas of computational technology. And one of our partnerships that we're very proud of is with IBM, that is supporting our research efforts. And IBM will bring the first quantum computing dedicated to biomedical research and biomedical use here in our medical campus by the end of this year. So you are embarking on a really important topic, and a topic that is an intersection between the use of what 21st century has blessed us, and that is artificial intelligence, and the need the 21st century has generated an awareness, and that is that we have a shared responsibility to bring as much good as we can to as many people in need as possible. So once again, welcome to Cleveland Clinic. We're so proud to have you here in Cleveland. It's so wonderful to hear that Cleveland is the center of biomedical and computational and a computational advancement. This is exactly what we were hoping to hear. But I'll turn the podium back to you, Adjourn or Mike, and I hope you'll enjoy your stay here. Thank you very much again. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mihaljevic. Of course, I only took me 3 tries. My apologies. Jordan definitely showed me up on that. Way to go, Jordan. I want to thank him not just for hosting us here today, but for the extraordinary team from the Cleveland Clinic who has welcomed us here today. Every single person we've met, every staff member, everybody, this is a first-class operation. And not only does it have a world-renowned reputation here at the Cleveland Clinic, but every person we've met here is extraordinary. So thank you for your warm welcome, and thank you for making this such a what I know is going to be a very, very fruitful endeavor. My name is Mike Ferguson. I'm the co-chair of this commission. I served in Congress for several years from the great state of New Jersey. Maybe not as great as Ohio, but we're working on it. And we have an extraordinary group of commissioners here who you will all get to meet through the course of today's hearing. a great group of experts. As my kids would say, these are people with big brains, okay? And we're really looking forward to hearing both from our witnesses, from our panels today, and also from the back and forth and the questioning from some of our commissioners. My co-chair, former Congressman John Delaney, will be joining us virtually sometime soon. He was scheduled, got stuck this morning, and he's going to be joining us at some point to share both his some remarks and to join in the questioning as well. I'm going to take the co-chair's prerogative for just a moment and recognize two great friends and very important people, certainly to me, and I know to a lot of other folks. I'm a senior advisor at the law firm of Berger-Wolf, which was founded 106 years ago here in Cleveland, and the leader of our 1,100 lawyers is here today, Paul Schmidt, the chairman of Berger-Wolf. He's a Cleveland native. He's based in the Washington office now, but Paul Schmidt is here today. Paul, thanks for being here. And I'm also very pleased to recognize another colleague from our firm, Carol Rendon. Carol is not only a fantastic lawyer, she was a great public servant. She was the U.S. attorney here in Cleveland a few years back, and is also a great partner with the Cleveland Clinic. We are so proud of our affiliation at Berger-Wolf with Cleveland Clinic. We are a legal services partner of the clinic here, and we couldn't be more proud of the great clients that we have, and none greater than the Cleveland Clinic for the impact that this institution is making on society. We're very, very pleased to be here today. So it's so interesting hearing Tom talking about AI and its impact on healthcare. AI has an amazing potential to transform our world for the better. We've been talking about that on our commission through our first hearing in Austin, and we continue that conversation here in Cleveland today. From using AI and machine learning to assist clinicians in detecting cancers, to using AI to develop new therapeutics, we can see how it can make our world a better and a healthier place. And while we continue to see how beneficial this technology can be for society, we also cannot ignore the concerns and the problems that can be associated with the use of artificial intelligence. That's really one of the reasons why I'm so pleased to co-chair this commission with former Congressman Delaney, and so pleased to be doing it on the platform of the United States Chamber of Commerce. We're really looking to address some of these concerns head on, and to ensure that future innovation that has so much potential to help society is also not stifled. During today's hearing, we are hoping to address issues around healthcare and to discuss how we prepare and assist the workforce for the future of an age of AI. I want to especially again thank the Cleveland Clinic for hosting us today. And I want to thank all of our presenters, our witnesses on these panels upcoming, for taking time out of their schedules. These are folks who have very, very successful careers, whether they're academics or industry folks. These are a lot of folks who are making a big impact on the world today. And for them to take time out of their schedule to be with us here today to share some of their wisdom and insights with us is very, very important to the work and the success of this commission. So with that, that's the end of my opening remarks. We're going to now take a moment. We're going to move to the front table here, and I'll invite our first three panelists to join me at the front desk. Any which way you want. Yeah. So we are going to get right into our testimony, and typically the way I think it's been helpful for us to do this is each of our presenters will share their remarks with us, and then we'll move into Q&A for everybody at the same time rather than going back and forth. I think that'll be a little bit more efficient use. At some point, I'm going to join my commissioners back up there in the first row, but I figured for this first one, I'm going to join you all down here in the presentations. So our three presenters on the first panel here are from the Cleveland Clinic, appropriately enough. First, we'll hear from Dr. Serpil Erzurum. Then we'll hear from Dr. Laura Jehi, and then Dr. Rohit Chandra. And why don't we go in that order that I just gave? And maybe you could begin your comments with a brief introduction of yourself, and then we'll hear a little bit about your thoughts for our topic here.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I am Serpil Erzurum. I have been here at the Cleveland Clinic since 1993. I'm a lung doctor. I also lead research, education, and innovation now for the Cleveland Clinic. I did not train here. I've worked in very small hospitals from South Dakota, Colorado, Texas, to the NIH intramural branch and at Pittsburgh. Cleveland is now my home, and I'm very happy to have been at the clinic for so long and address this important topic. So with that, I'll start off perhaps with framing my memory of the past in healthcare. I think it's important to remember where we've been and then talk about where we are now and then the future. Well, I think we can say that healthcare is one of our greatest success stories in the United States. In the early 1900s, we had no antibiotics till 1940. We had no vaccines till the 40s and 50s. We had no chemotherapy, no anesthesia. The revolution in healthcare that occurred during the first part of the 1900s was based upon the industrial age revolution and molecular and chemical understanding of life. These are ages, epochs really, of our research and our capability as human beings to understand human life. We're in a new epoch that started about, I don't know, Rohit, maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago with IBM maybe. Digital revolution, the digital epoch, the data age. And that's why we're here. Now, there are a few things about healthcare success. Medical success means we're all getting older. So there are a number of things that are stressing the healthcare system now. And the reason I'm bringing them up is because we look to digital opportunities to overcome those struggles. The most important one is we've done so well in healthcare that we're all getting older. And by 2050, 1 in 4 people will be over 65. In the past, people died of infections. That's very, very rare. We live to be old. My dad is 100 years old, but he has a lot of problems. So as we have 1 in 4 people in the United States with a lot of problems and being very old, there are some real healthcare stresses. The aging population and the expectation of those people for how they'll get care. What will be available to them? Who will know about them? And so with all this coming together, we cannot ignore the opportunity to solve these problems with the digital resources that we have at our fingertips. It is clear to me that over my time as being a physician, I started with pen, black pen, and paper. You can't read my writing. That was one of the problems in the that when we had paper charts, nobody could read what anybody else wrote. We now have digital charts, the electronic health record. We are all digitized on that system. And as we see that digital resource sitting there in front of us as physicians, we want to use it. We want to solve the problems of our patients through this opportunity of accessing more knowledge through that digital resource. And the electronic health record was launched in 2010. And with it has launched 1 million projects for research and following patients and understanding them. It's a wonderful time to be a physician. I no longer have to try to decipher the writing of my colleague. I have all the imaging I want right there at my fingertips. I don't have to try to hunt them down. And yet there are risks associated with this, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring them up. I value privacy. I value privacy for myself. I'm a patient too. And, when I go to the physician, and I know when my patients come to me and they tell me things that no one else knows, including their loved ones, because they trust me. They trust me to do what's best for them and their health. And they trust me not to tell people, actually, to tell you the truth. I don't know where that will go with the electronic health record. I also have to bring up that my idea of privacy is very different than my daughter's, who are in their 20s. I think privacy may be a forgotten word in the future. Nevertheless, we should deal with it, because even if privacy is somewhat different for that generation, I don't think they expect us to transport their data to Amazon and sell it. I also think, as a physician and all caregivers, when we graduate school, medical school, I did not take an oath to cure patients. I hope I do. That's the goal. We want to cure and make people feel better. The only oath that we took was to do no harm. We are to do no harm to that person we're seeing. You know why we take that oath? We can harm people because they tell us things. They trust us. And so we have in this room people who are going to have to make those policy decisions. And it is so important to the caregivers and the patients, and all of you in this room, of course, are either patients or caregivers or something. We have to hold true to that oath to do no harm, because the patient is a vulnerable person. And I will just end with that.
Thank you, Serpil. We definitely don't want to do any harm. So I'm Lara Jehi. I'm a neurologist specialized in epilepsy. I came to Cleveland Clinic in 2000 as a medical student, and I've stayed since then in Cleveland Clinic. It's home to me, as it is to the thousands of caregivers that Dr. Mihaljevic mentioned at the beginning. And what bonds us all is this commitment that patients are first. This is a Cleveland Clinic motto, but for us, it's not just words. It's not why we come, but it's why we stay in Cleveland Clinic. And anybody who is working with you today that you're going to meet or you've already met shares those two words, otherwise they wouldn't be here. And we're also grateful to be here, and we're grateful for you for joining us and hearing us today. So my role for the clinic, I'm the Chief Research Information Officer. In that role, I am the one who is bridging research and information technology to enable all of the innovation and creation of new knowledge that our caregivers here do. I will cover two main themes in my testimony. First, I will take you through a deeper dive into some of the applications of AI that we are now doing in Cleveland Clinic, our day-to-day encounters with AI. And then second, I will take you through some highlights over the guiding principles that frame our decisions around AI. So let's start with the applications. Dr. Mihaljevic mentioned so many. I will focus on three categories because these three categories mirror the three big aspects of a patient's journey with us in Cleveland Clinic. The first being diagnosing disease, the second being treating disease, and then the third being prognosis, figuring out how that disease is going to evolve over time. And at the clinic, we are using AI across that whole continuum. Starting with diagnosis, let's talk about stroke. Stroke is a devastating illness It's an affliction where blood supply is just suddenly cut off from a certain region in the brain. I'm a neurologist, so I had to start with something that's closer to home. In stroke, time is literally brain. Every minute, every second that goes by where that brain region isn't getting the blood supply that it needs is time where brain cells are dying, and those do not recover. So it is imperative that we find that blockage and address it as soon as possible. At the clinic, our radiology department has implemented an AI software that does three things. It automates the detection of large vessel occlusion, so that's the blockage in the blood vessel. It automatically alerts the doctor, the interventionalist, whose job it is to fix that blockage. And it gets the whole team that needs to be involved. That's the neurologist, the surgeon, the radiologist. They're automatically all called together in a virtual chat room to immediately review the case together and decide on the best course of action. By doing that, precious minutes are saved, and with them, brain function. The second application, let's go to disease management and use drug discovery as an example. Quite often, the way a drug works against a disease is by bonding, linking to receptors in the brain, in the body, that then trigger a series of reactions that are influencing that disease progression. Pretty much like a puzzle, pieces of a puzzle that have to fit together and then unlock a series of things that need to happen after them. AI algorithms have helped our researchers canvas through tons of data on drugs that already are on the market, already FDA approved to treat certain diseases, but AI has helped them perform simulations on those drugs to see if they can actually help other diseases. This is how we have found, for example, that Viagra could be a promising drug candidate to help prevent Alzheimer's disease, treat it also. The next step is to actually test that hypothesis in rigorous clinical trials. Ending with prognosis, let's talk about COVID. We used AI algorithms to automatically predict who is going to progress to severe disease. Of the hundreds of patients who are being diagnosed with COVID in our health system every day at the peak of the pandemic, who are the few in that ocean of patients who are at highest risk of quickly, rapidly progressing to a point of severity where they end up in the emergency room or at the hospital. We had to find them as quickly as possible. And these AI algorithms were using data, key data that we have in our electronic health record to help us identify these patients as quickly as possible and make that prediction, that risk level, visible to the people who needed to see it, our nurses whose job was to call every single patient who was COVID positive, to follow them up and monitor their disease progression. Instead of being lost in the ocean, that algorithm that we developed and integrated in our electronic health record helped us surface that prediction, make those patients more visible so that these nurses could get to them as soon as possible, give them the care they need as soon as possible. But also, more importantly, it freed them to go back and do their pre-COVID work, right? These nurses didn't fall from the sky. They already had a full-time job monitoring people with diabetes, with hypertension, with cancer, with all the medical problems that our world still had and still has now, in addition to COVID. And they had initially, without these algorithms, they had dropped everything they were doing to just focus on this one emergency, this one disease. The algorithms that we created were the tool that allowed them to prioritize and allowed us to get to the sickest patients when they really needed us. All these examples share one critical commonality. In all of them, the AI tools were informing, but they were not replacing the human decision-making element. And that is key. When we talk about the value of AI, we are not talking about some magical wand that's going to just be waved and solve our problems and give us the answers. These tools are effective in Cleveland Clinic because we use them to inform. We don't rely on them. In all the examples that I mentioned, there was a human safeguard. There was a person with judgment that was looking at what the AI algorithms were doing and making the final decision. But that human's job was so much easier because of what the AI algorithms provided upfront. And that is the piece that cannot be lost in all of this. Pivoting now to the second half of my testimony, what guiding principles do we follow in our overall AI strategy? And again, I'll give you three. The first one is that the value of an AI algorithm is not in its academic, scientific sophistication. Its value is in what it actually does to help people, in what it actually does at the end of the day to change healthcare for the better. After an AI model is generated and before it gets implemented, the key steps of validating it, testing it, deploying it, optimizing it, all of those steps are really essential. And we have to know that the model is generating accurate predictions in the real world, not just in a research setting. We have to make sure that the right eyes will see it at the right time and then make the right decision. At the clinic, we have a team that goes through that rigor, all these steps that I mentioned before we quote unquote apply any AI model in our patient care system. Second guiding principle, research and clinical care need to be aligned for the benefit of all. What do I mean by that? Clinical care is where the questions come from. This is where the challenges are. These are the problems that we need to solve. They come from clinicians who are taking care of people. But the models with AI are generated in research. Research is where the science transforms this amorphous mass of data, the flood of data that we talked about earlier. Research is what transforms all of that into useful insights, into something that is good at the end that can be used. And these two parties, clinical care and research, have to speak. They have to coordinate. Just imagine, if you would, sure, if clinical care and research were actually holding hands. I have this dream of both of them holding hands and walking together down a path, the same path, towards a final common good, versus the reality that many institutions across the country deal with, where research sits in a silo and clinical care sits in another silo. And we could add a third silo, which is industry and commercialization stakeholders in all of this. We could do so much better if we actually coordinate. And this coordination, this alignment means two things. It means alignment in process. So take the COVID example that I mentioned. We wouldn't have been successful if we hadn't coordinated very closely between our research teams and our clinical care team. Even things as simple as developing the clinical templates, the notes that the clinicians would use when they are seeing patients. We coordinated the researchers with the clinicians to align what is being asked about in clinic with what data elements we are using in the development of our models. Something as simple as this just made our job so much easier. And it allowed us to ask the questions that these clinicians really cared about. Alignment is also alignment in technology. The data that gets collected is the source that we build these models on. We build the models in platforms, in analytic platforms. These two things also don't always talk together. So we need technology that aligns data collection with data analytics, with implementation of models. And that technology isn't always accessible, and it isn't always safe to use. The last thing, the last guiding principle that I wanted to finish with is that we cannot lose of the anchor. This conversation is really about people. It's about your constituents, Representative Delaney and Representative Ferguson. It's your constituents. It is our patients. And it is the patients of today, but equally important, it's the patients of tomorrow. They are both equally important. One cannot precede the other. The patients of tomorrow are our kids and our grandkids, and they're the ones that our kids and grandkids are going to take care of. And both deserve our attention. The today cannot come at the expense of tomorrow. And I am saying this not just because I think it, I do think it, but I'm saying it because I asked, and I asked the patients. Dr. Mihaljevic mentioned our Cleveland Clinic data governance principles in passing. That is a one-page document that is publicly available on our website, and we give it to every patient, every new patient that establishes care in Cleveland Clinic. This one page took us about a year and a half to create because it took numerous conversations among us. And the us here is clinicians, researchers, administrators, lawyers, compliance officers, and patients. We would go every step of the way back to our patients and ask them, what do they think this means to them? What do they think is missing? What do they want to emphasize? They were our partners in creating that document. And what they told us is that they are trusting us with their data. They are trusting us with their specimens that we heard about earlier. So they want us to protect that information. But what they also said is they want us to use that data, use those specimens, and research and innovate. They want us to do things. They don't want us to just protect behind a wall and secure without any benefit, right, that's coming out of that securing. Patients demand that we research and innovate. Regulation, privacy, confidentiality are key, but they should not come at the expense of discovery. Cleveland Clinic, we had to innovate actually in our data governance processes, and we revamped our whole structure around data sharing. That was another numerous series of meetings and stakeholders. Innovation in the technology that manages confidentiality, privacy, and with it regulation has to also evolve. We cannot regulate a field that's evolving as quickly as data science, computation, AI, and in the very near future, quantum computing with regulation principles and with technology that is from the past century. Technology is evolving. Our thinking about how to deal with it needs to evolve in parallel. I would like to conclude with a statement that one of my colleagues told me in one of our recent conversations about AI opportunities, challenges for Cleveland Clinic. He's one of our surgeons, and he is a member of this team that we have together. He said, Lara, in the big scheme of things, our professional half-life on this earth is relatively short. We only have so much time to make a difference. We need to make that time count. See, that's that patient's first. So I want to thank you, the chamber and the members and leadership of this hearing, for your attention to this matter, your investment in thinking through it, and all the thoughtfulness you brought to the planning and to make sure that our time together today will count. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, before we go to Dr. Chandra, I just need to make a couple of remarks. There's I asked our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. There's a way too much humility up here. And you can tell I'm used to dealing with folks in Washington, D.C., where there's maybe less of that. So, in Washington, there's folks who are ready to tell you every great thing about themselves, whether they're accurate or not. And here we don't have that same affliction. So I would just like to take a couple of moments for each of our panelists and give you a little bit of their background for our audience. Dr. Erzurum, who you heard from first, she's the Chief Research and Academic Officer here at the clinic. She focuses on strategic growth of enterprise-wide medical and scientific educational programs, clinical, basic, and translational research, and technology development to deliver the most innovative care to patients. She earned her medical degree from Northeastern Ohio University's College of Medicine and completed residency training in internal medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. Dr. Jehi, who you just heard from, is a professor of neurology, as she said, at the clinic's Lerner College of Medicine and an epilepsy specialist at the clinic since 2006. She's the director of outcomes research, or the outcomes research program for epilepsy. And as she mentioned, importantly, she's the chief research information officer for the Cleveland Clinic Health System. And the executive program lead for the Discovery Accelerator focused on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and data science education. She received her medical degree from American University of Beirut, and she completed her residency in neurology and fellowship in clinical neurophysiology at Cleveland Clinic and holds a master's degree in healthcare delivery science from Dartmouth College. Finally, we are going to hear from Dr. Chandra, who is the clinic's chief digital officer. He oversees the information technology division and leads the digital innovation throughout the Cleveland Clinic's global health system. He holds a Bachelor of Technology degree from the Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur, India, and a Doctor of Philosophy degree from Stanford University. So, as you can see, those are important things to know. And of course, with those sorts of accomplishments, they've been very humble about sharing those with you. So I took it upon myself to share all these things with you. Dr. Chandra.
I'll give a little bit of background on myself, and I know that we want to get to the Q&A, so I'll keep it brief. My background is I grew up and I've been trained as a software engineer, and I've worked in the technology industry for the last 25 years. Most recently, I worked at Yahoo for about 15 years, working on search and online advertising. And if I look back just at the evolution of the industry, that's where a lot of technologies and techniques around big data and around analytics and AI were developed. So that's a little bit of my background. A year ago, I was approached by the clinic, and a little bit to Dr. Mihaljevic's point that he made earlier. I think the clinic had a realization that there's significant opportunities in leveraging technology to transform healthcare. And the clinic made a deliberate effort to go outside the healthcare industry and recruit people from technology, with the premise that actually it's that deep collaboration that's going to unlock sort of the big breakthroughs in healthcare. So I was approached by the clinic about a year back. And for me, it was a fascinating conversation because healthcare is big. And as I talked to the clinic more, there's a lot of opportunities to leverage technology. And that's kind of what brought me here. I've been at the clinic for about a little over 2 months. So my perspectives are still evolving, but at least I'll share some early thoughts. One observation is just about AI. I know that we're gathered here because all of us believe that AI has the potential to transform healthcare. One comment that I will make, if you look at just the trajectory of AI is only partly about algorithms. It's mostly about data. And it's important to keep that in mind. And if I look at the clinic, we don't just generate, or healthcare in general, we don't just generate large or vast amounts of data. We generate an insane amount of data. And there are tons of insights and applications that are literally waiting to be discovered. That's the opportunity. And the example that Dr. Jehi gave about finding cross uses of drugs where Viagra could potentially help Alzheimer's. This is literally discovery. You don't go in with that hypothesis, but because of the fact that we have large amounts of data, makes it possible for us to say, can we throw algorithms at it? A computer, literally by brute force, you throw enough computational power, you have enough data. That's where new insights can be generated. And that's the potential. Roughly 15 years back is when I think there was a national effort to put and get all of this data digitized. We are now at a place where we have electronic health records. I think the next frontier is actually leveraging that data, not just to provide individual care, but to actually discover new opportunities, new treatments, whether it's in research, whether it's in just discovery of new correlations that we did not know before. And I think that that's sort of the opportunity in terms of the long term. I would also add that these techniques have the potential to help us in even more immediate timeframes as well. So Dr. Mihaljevic said that if you take the top 5 healthcare institutions, we probably touch sub 10% of the lives. And there's an opportunity for technology to say, how can we scale that out to provide, to reach way more number of patients, to provide them equally good care, and to do it at a lower cost. So trying to maintain safety, consistency, and quality of care, and to do it at scale, that's the opportunity. I'll just give simple examples. Today, physicians are spending 40% of their time typing up notes. That's a good part about electronic health records. Can we leverage speech? Can we leverage AI algorithms that can transcribe a physician's conversation into electronic health records and reduce the time from 40% to 20%? That again helps physicians to scale. It provides consistency of care, lower cost, equally good, if not better outcomes. Another example would be, can you understand enough from the data to see which patients are more likely to develop which afflictions, which ones are likely to need more acute care versus less acute care, and you can sort of focus your energies and efforts accordingly, and then again enables us to provide equally good care, scale it out, and at a better sort of cost point. The last thing that I would say is, it's not easy to do these deep collaborations, and my empirical observation is that we are probably only scratching the surface. And that's a question that I think is facing us as an industry, and to the extent that there are policy initiatives that can help enable that, I think it's an important conversation to have. Thus far, I don't think any healthcare institution has really cracked it in terms of how do you leverage technology deeply across all of these spectrums. There are bits and pieces of it, but I think we have an opportunity to do a lot more. And I think that that's a question that, obviously we as the clinic are trying to figure out how to crack, but that's something that I think that faces the industry as a whole.
Dr. Chandra, thank you. We're going to move into questions now, but I will just say that's an amazing amount of time that physicians spend taking notes. And I have to say that I have a daughter who's graduating from college next month. She's wanted to be a nurse for a long time. She has this great desire to care for patients. And she got a job upon her graduation, and she's going to be a scribe. And I didn't even know that this job existed, but she told me she's going to be trailing around physicians and nurses and others, just typing everything they say into the laptop, which is very exciting. I was very excited because it's a great step on her way of trying to be a healthcare provider. She was actually most excited because she says she's going to get to wear scrubs, which is what she's maybe.
Scribe and scrub.
She's very excited about that. But perhaps she can be a part of this process of reducing the amount of time that physicians need to be taking their notes. Our commissioners, please. Now, I'm not going to give every one of your backgrounds either. And I know our witnesses have had a chance, and others in our audience have had a chance to see your profiles on the CTEC Chamber of Commerce website. But if perhaps before you ask your question, if you want to briefly just give your affiliation, that would be most appropriate for our audience and our panelists. Who'd like to begin? Please.
Hi, I'm Mihaljevic from Michigan University. We've heard a lot of talk from all of you about the importance of privacy, but also innovation and striking that balance. And this is where there's a pretty clear intersection with public policy. This is something I think all of us up here struggle with, is trying to find that proper balance. Perhaps you can tease out for us a little bit more about how you think we should go about that, or how Congress or other lawmakers should strike that balance and ensure that we get the maximum amount of medical care, but also protect patient rights.
I'll take that first. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, that's what I'm
you're
doing.
That's your
Yeah.
focus.
So it's a very tricky question. And what we, found as a general principle that can help us navigate it is the importance of transparency, being transparent to patients about what data we're collecting and why, and what do we intend to do with it. It is very challenging to strike that balance between imagining every single scenario where things can go wrong and make sure you are protected against it by putting it in a lengthy legal document and expecting a patient to understand what all of that means for them. Language has to be simple. It has to be direct. Patients have to understand what they're getting into. And we need, as a healthcare system, to abide by certain rules of engagement, for what we will do and not do with data and samples that they provide us. So having a document like this, we called it our 10 commandments, actually, not to be presumptuous about it, but we wanted to stick with a clear set of simple rules that patients knew and understood. So we generated that and we give it to them whenever they register for care. We also are creating a patient advisory council related to data. That was the creation of that council was part of this revamping around our structure with governing data sharing initiatives and review of what data gets shared. Part of that process was we realized we have to include patients in it. It's not practical nor realistic to expect that every single opportunity for data sharing, either internally or externally, would be reviewed by a patient. That is just not going to happen. But we needed to keep patients involved, and we needed to stay abreast of where their mindset is, right? Serpil talked about how privacy means different things to her than it does to her daughter. So we cannot just assume that where patients sit as far as what they allow us or don't allow us to do with their data now is going to apply actually tomorrow or later. That is a dynamic, evolving thing. So we're creating this patient advisory council that we are going to be meeting with every quarter and discuss with them, right, different questions, different topics related to data sharing, so that we are continuously on the same page, right? So it's process, simple communication, keeping patients involved, making sure the rules are clear for our institutional review board. That's the body that governs data transfer sharing for research purposes, and with our law department, where every single project, in a way, is being looked at in a standardized fashion, where you ask the same question to anybody along that hierarchy, and you're going to get an answer. So it's innovating the process, the infrastructure for how to handle this, rather than relying on individuals and individual documents and stuffing them with language that is not really going to be applicable very soon after it gets signed.
I want to add one thing. I think that's absolutely wonderful what you've said. I want to point out the fact that we have two people sitting up here whose job description didn't exist 3 years ago. So the reason we did that, Dave remembers, our chief legal officer, we saw this tsunami coming. 100,000-fold our data has increased in the last 5 years, almost 1,000-fold. Yeah, Rohit comes from Yahoo. He says we have an insane amount of data. That is the perspective here. And I don't think any of you know how much data we have. One of the things would be to know, what is the data we have and what should be shared? What are the controls? We hired a chief research information officer. The job didn't exist. Our CEO at the time asked, what is this? I said, it's Toby Cosgrove, that's the old one, so it's okay. It's Toby. And I had to make a case for it. Now it seems like everybody's having this, right? Because we asked ourselves the question you just asked. Oh my gosh, I was getting all these data use agreements. I said, how do I know? And I think what Laura's trying to tell you is we're purpose-driven. We're a healthcare system to drive stuff that's good for you. And so maybe this kind of collective of what you're starting here, right? Coming together, starting to understand what is the insane amount of data we have. I bet you're curious now. And how many data use agreements because I'm the signature, how many can I really sign, Dave? Honestly, there's a lot. So what's the control mechanism? That's what you're here for. We need to understand each other. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It said here to push the button, so I'm pushing the button too. I'm Alex Demakis, I'm a professor in UT Austin. I wanted to ask a little bit more about, you said, if I understand correctly, that you are deploying in production, as we would say, AI systems, AI models that are making recommendations. I wanted to understand, is this the physician or the experts enter the data in some app, or they're already there, and then the machine says, do A, and then, of course, the expert has some judgment, but does the expert interact with the model in any way? Is there any transparency or interpretability knobs or mechanisms that the expert can interact with? Or is it just, okay, machine says, do A, I also think that's probably a good idea, but I haven't read all this data in detail, or hopefully I have. And I make a decision from that. So that's one aspect. And the second aspect, relating a little bit, you said 40% of the time goes in writing notes. And, maybe 40% of my time goes in writing research proposals. But while I'm writing them, I'm actually maybe thinking about them, or maybe I'm actually making sure so what part of this 40% would you say, that's my second question, could be just automated, or what part is actually loading in the brain of the expert the key things and actually thinking about it and actually making a decision? A part that probably would not be automatable. I guess these are my two questions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can take a crack at the second one and maybe part of the first. So I think we have to push to see the one part that I would say, obviously, when you're writing 40% of your time writing proposals, that's actually when you're thinking is, I think, the point. When a physician is with a patient, then actually observing the patient is critical. So their attention should be with the patient and understanding all of sort of the different observations that you want to make. And part of it is that you need to connect with the patient. So it's kind of harder to say. And I think that physicians fall into the trap of trying to say, either during a patient visit, either they're not looking at the patient and typing up notes, or they're spending 3 hours at night typing up notes. So that's sort of the dilemma. Whether that 40% goes down to 30 or 20, I don't know, but I do think that it is something that is a significant drain on their staffing. The other question that you asked was around when we deploy AI-based recommendations or decision support systems, is it just a black box or something? I think the successful methodology is when the models and the predictions are done not by a technologist, not by a physician, but together. So I think that they need to be trained, because that requires domain expertise. So before you get to a model, before you can deploy it in production and make a decision support sort of recommendation, it needs to be something that meets a physician's bar for accuracy and recall before you would say you would use it in a production setting. So I think it has to be developed jointly. And after that, obviously, to scale it out, hopefully, with hundreds of thousands of physicians, you don't necessarily need that kind of back and forth.
I can testify as a physician who still sees many patients every week that there's a tremendous amount of time that is being lost by physicians just doing the typing piece. When I'm in clinic, I want to be looking at the patient, talking to them, listening to them. I cannot really listen when my head is away towards a screen and typing up. So in reality, what happens is I look at the patient, talk to them, and then literally I say, let's break give me a couple of minutes so I can type this up in the computer. And then I move, and then I type. The patient is sitting there, and then I move back, and then I continue the conversation. How useful is that? There is, it's not really rocket science that this is not the best use of the time of somebody who is, trained in medicine and did everything that they had to do. So there is a lot of opportunity for efficiencies there. Now, the second question that you had is really about explainability, right, of the models that we have. And that is one of the steps that we go through as we're reviewing these models before we implement them. We try as much as possible to automate the ingestion of data first into the prediction of the models to minimize the load on the physicians who are, encountering them, that they don't have to manually, enter what goes into these calculators or predictions. But more importantly, when the prediction comes out, we did one on the risk of readmissions after hospital discharge. There is an absolute risk that gets predicted that is surfaced, but then there is next to it an explanation of where that came from. So of all the 20, 30 things that could contribute to somebody's risk of ending back up in the hospital, which ones are, for this particular patient, the ones that are most relevant? So the physician has some insight then to help them know what to do, with that prediction. In the example I mentioned about the large vessel occlusion with the stroke situation, all the algorithm is saying is that there might be an occlusion here. And the physician is still looking at the raw data. They're still looking at the scan, right? And then deciding if they believe it or not. The false positive rate is 8%. But we decided that that's acceptable because it was more important for us to not miss an occlusion when it's there than the alternative. And but the safeguard that we implemented is then this last step where there is that virtual call where the whole team gets together and together reviews those scans to decide what to do, so that it's not the algorithm making the treatment decision, it's the group of physicians who would have made it otherwise. But they are making it at the right time, informed with the raw data that was assimilated, right, by the algorithm.
So I'm Christina Montgomery from IBM. And I had a question. When you think about the guiding principles and the steps that you go through before deploying an AI algorithm, and you think about it across the categories that you described in terms of using AI, do you have a different standard in, for example, diagnosis versus treatment versus the prognosis? Like, do you hold an algorithm to being more accurate in any of those standards, for example? And then as you think about the life cycle of the models and the algorithm, do you have a process for sort of over the life cycle as it's deployed, testing and ensuring that it remained true to what it was intended to do initially?
Yes. So the answer is yes to both questions. The team that we have that reviews these models before they get deployed includes members from our, the medical, the clinician side of things, in addition to the technology side of things. So we ask of every team to give us a detailed plan, right, for what they want to do. So first, who do they want to see this model? What do they want them to do when they see the result? How are they going to make sure that the right thing happens? And how are we going to make sure that whatever decision they made now is going to still be applicable 6 months from now? So, for example, one of the decisions that we make when we review these is at what point should we revisit them? And with some of them, we say we revisit in a year. With some of them, we say we revisit in 6 months, etc., depending on that particular application. In a situation like this stroke example that I mentioned, we really cannot miss. I mean, when you only have minutes and you have to fix it, it's okay to get that team together 8% of the time and they still decide this is nothing, let's move on, right? So you allow some false positives. But when it's a screening, situation, your standards would be different.
I think we have time for one more on this panel. I'm going to let you all fight it out. We have a lot of interest here, and of course, we can follow up later informally. But go ahead.
I've heard a lot of.
You had the biggest smile. He was just charming us up here.
It's a trick I learned. I've heard a lot of talk on the panel about data privacy, and I in the healthcare space, I think it's super important. The one thing I have not heard is the question of equity, especially given that this is healthcare that every single person in the country will need at some point, and especially given that Cleveland Clinic, as Dr. Tom was saying, sees only 1.5% of the hardest cases in the country. How do the models you build apply generally? Is that something you think about?
Yes, we do think about that. We think about it a lot, actually. And it is something that we specifically look at. We learned to look at it more during the pandemic, actually. One of the models that we created was one that allowed us to predict the spread of the pandemic regionally, and we were looking at it very regularly, and we saw how the rate of infection was growing at a much faster rate in our disadvantaged neighborhoods here around us. And we took that immediately. Actually, I remember the day when I saw the curve. I called Serpil, and then she said, she spoke to Tom, and then we showed it to the executive team. All of that happened immediately. And because of it, we ended up taking steps as a healthcare system to make our care more equitable in the region. We sent buses to go to those neighborhoods to test, to offer testing for COVID. We put teams together to be available to make sure that those patients got connected back to our system. It just highlighted to us how important it is to make a conscious effort into it. And then we translated from that. Now it's just routine practice. In every model that we develop, we test for bias, we test for distribution. It's routine.
It's a good question because that's a great example. It will improve health equity. When you see it, you can't ignore it. It's transparency. And that's what we need. We need transparency across all the healthcare systems. Right now, we don't have it. And I think that's the problem. Yeah.
This has been a fabulous first panel. Thank you. I know some of our commissioners have follow-up questions. Maybe we can submit those, as we'll say in congressional parlance. We'll submit those for the record, QFRs, and hopefully get some additional information as answers to your questions. Thank you to our first panel. This has been marvelous. We are going to take a 5-minute recess. Okay, we are going to get started with our second panel, and I will introduce each of our panelists.
You don't trust us.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. I've been burned by that. And I will introduce each of our panelists as they are preparing to deliver their remarks. So we're going to go in this order, only because it's the order on the piece of paper in front of me. So first we'll hear from Shawn Wang. Shawn is the Chief AI Officer at Anthem. He leads the enterprise scale AI and digital transformations. He has significant cross-industry experience from retail, e-commerce, and now healthcare. And he is from the graduated from the University of Southern California Marshall School of Business. Shawn.
Thanks, Mike, for the introduction, and I want to thank the U.S. Chamber of AI Commission for pulling us together and have the great opportunity to listen some of the great insight from my peers and also our opportunity to really share some of our perspective as the people actually do the work. I was joking with some of the folks during the break. I was really inspired by the prior remarks done by the Cleveland Clinic folks. And we were joking with Tanya and Ben that it's pretty a serious competition going on there between the panels. So we have to do well to really kind of show how it's done. So anyway, a little bit background myself. And before healthcare, and I worked 7 years in Anthem. Before that, I spent 10 years actually at the home retail company. So it's named Sears. I'm probably many of you heard of the company. I think my memories, I'm not that old, so I do remember, the initial, we call it cutting edge consumer engagement technology was the catalog. It was mailed to the consumer homes and then really to share the product and services, engage the consumer for shopping behaviors. I spent 10 years working on digital technology and data analytics, really more as a consumer as of these days. And nowadays, we're kind of very used to much better, much more personalized digital experience. So we're expecting same day or second day delivery from Amazon. We're expecting seamless payments. We never need to worry about, payment go through or not, and things get paid or not get paid. And we're expecting personalized recommendations from, you name it, Netflix. So when you look at healthcare, it's totally different animal. We see signal opportunities and also gaps, really for us to apply same rigor with technology and data and insight to really empower the users and really drive that transformation and really to meet the consumer expectation. This is about meeting expectations, really to deliver services and deliver experience the consumer deserve. They deserve it. So we have a lot of work to do. Let's talk a little bit about definition of AI. There's so many technical definition of those. You can look up on the Google, but my definition is very simple. It is about delivering actionable intelligence that power end users. So to just keep that perspective in mind, it has to empower the end users. Itself is not good. It has to empower the end users. There are really two primary type of AI application and use in the company like Anthem. The first one, again, back to empowerment. It's really empowering the end associates, to empower our stakeholders, to really be much more connected and coordinated. I give you a tangible example, and there are plenty of examples shared by Cleveland Clinic on the clinical setting. My use case is a little bit different. It's about really coordination of different teams to deliver that, I would say, sensible experience or sensible interaction with consumers. So one example is we do have an ongoing AI collaboration with Cleveland Clinic, believe it or not, between the insurance company and one of the most effective care providers. So it's really about on cardiac care. So we created predictive algorithms to predict folks are likely going to need to have cardiac care and procedures. Now from there, we take every opportunity to either direct the patient or members to actually patient access center in Cleveland Clinic. Or we share the insight with Cleveland Clinic so they can do proactive outreach to these patients. And what they do is they offer very complimentary medical advice and recommendations. And then, from there, it leads to more personalized treatment plans and care plans, take actions to close the gaps and to help improve the quality and also provide much better access options. Since there are always options, may not be a surgery needed, maybe a second opinion, maybe other, more effective treatment plans. So that's kind of one primary use. When you look at that example, it's so much to do with how do you create the connectivities between different stakeholders, between different resources, really healthcare about the team. So the initial, remarks by the CEO of Cleveland Clinic talk about it. Healthcare is not about individual. Healthcare about really a team effort to bring things together. The second primary use case and applications is around automation. When you look at healthcare, there are significant cost inefficiencies tied to administrative process, processing claims, processing billing, processing prior auth. So what we do at Anthem, we put a lot of effort and investment into embedding AI and digital technology into our care management teams. By doing that, freeing up them from the routine and manual tasks on like prior auth review and other things, so that they have more resources and opportunities and really to spend time on patient-centric activities, talking to the patient, solving the problem from the members, dealing with a provider to really look at their pain point, see how we can better support them. So you kind of think about it. Many folks actually have this kind of misnotion of, AI can automate jobs. Well, it could, but it automates the non-value added jobs. It creates opportunities for more value added, value generation activities that will benefit for the greater good. So kind of want to give you that perspective of the use cases and what we see is really how AI can come to value from a very fundamental way. Now talk about policy considerations. That's the topic, right? Where we're here today to provide some thoughts around that topic. So really 3 key aspects of this. One is we think that the policymakers need to make sure align with both private and public effort on AI policy recommendations and creation. So when you look at the multiple groups, there's NIST, right? So that organization, ongoing work on technology standard, including AI. Then we have FDA. Actually, the great news there is released the initial guideline of addressing and improving diversity in clinical trial. That's a great step in the right direction in terms of addressing potential misrepresentation of healthcare data sets. And the third one is the NOC organization is really around the data sharing standard. So these things, some are AI specific, some are not, but they are dependent on each other. Data sharing is a foundation of AI, as the Cleveland Clinic chief digital officer talk about. Mostly is really dependent on the data. So how do we facilitate the data sharing for better use of AI to create a greater good? Big deal. The second component is about the policy, focus of policy. It needs to be on outcome, not on technology itself. It's really about making sure that we have the policies which is adaptive, so can actually evolve along with the technology advancements. Otherwise, it's really, you run the risk of being irrelevant very quickly. And it's gonna be you're gonna have a hard time playing that catching up game. And in that aspect, we also wanna support and propose supporting the responsible AI framework and principles. Not only look at one aspect of AI, which a lot of articles and publications talk about how do we govern the use of data in the AI algorithm, but also you heard the folks talk about the real AI life cycle. So it's really encompassing many aspects of components of when you create AI, starting with scoping the right project, making sure you solve the right problem, and making sure you have stakeholders, actually, the clinicians and healthcare resources embedded in that scoping. And second one is creation of the AI. AI is not a black box. You need clinical SMEs input to making sure the right features being incorporated, and so the predictive algorithms and AI can do as a decent job as the intent to be. And the third one is production. So there's stats around, there's significant number of percentage of AI projects actually fall short, going from research development to actual production. So no production, there's no value. It's wasted effort. So it's about production. So how do we make sure that production process is really being thought through and actually have the integration between AI and the bigger picture is non-AI systems? That's a lot of things people don't talk about. In reality, AI is a small component of the bigger ecosystem of how the care is delivered. The last one is monitoring, making sure we have the right monitoring to make sure the AI is doing what it's intended to do constantly, effectively. So that responsible AI framework, we think should be a primary consideration for policymaker to think through. The last one is really around, there's this kind of balance between setting the right standard and also not hindering and inhibiting the innovation, ongoing continuous innovation, and also adoption of AI technology for greater good. So that balance it need to be thought through, and that risk, it need to be thought through. So that's all I want to say today. I want to thank you, the commission again for having us here. And I want to thank Cleveland Clinic for the great partnership. And I want to thank all the attendees, even though I do see there like less number of people kind of for this session, but maybe it's not by cause or by design, but I appreciate everybody's support and engagement. Thank you.
They have to treat patients, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Shawn. Next, we're going to hear from Ben Coe. Ben is the general manager at Kaleidoscope Innovation and Product Design. He works on designing medical solutions with a patient-centric mindset, bringing solutions to improve the human experience. He's a graduate of the University of Cincinnati. Ben, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you to the co-chairs, Ferguson and Delaney, and to the commissioners. It's been a great session already today, and it's also great to not only go second in this so I can gather my thoughts, but also go second kind of in the meta presentation of these field hearings. Being able to listen to the comments from the Austin hearing was informative. It was also great to hear so many important issues brought up there so that we could formulate some context around those, but also bring some context that's really important for our perspectives as product developers who exist in an ecosystem of creators. So as Mr. Ferguson said, I'm Ben Coe. I'm the general manager of Kaleidoscope Innovation. We're a product development company located in Cincinnati, Ohio. Love that this is also occurring in a great state like Ohio. And we have the pleasure and privilege of working as a consultancy with many companies across different industries. Most of our business is in medical device and pharmaceutical solutions. That's device and technology creation for productization. But we also get to work in industries like consumer electronics and in industrial systems, manufacturing and automation. And so we, like I said, it's a privilege because we get to use that position as a point of cross-pollination. What are you doing in other industries that we can apply in the problem that you're trying to solve? The core point I want to make about our business is that we are not the technologists themselves. We're not the researchers creating the data sets that from which many of these insights are being drawn. But what our role is to turn that technology and those insights, that research, into products, into solutions, whether that's a software system, a medical device. How do we deliver drugs more effectively? How can we automate processes for more efficiency? And the important point about that is our process, as described as patient-centric, is user-centered design. That's the more generic term of it. And these days, it's often user-driven design. So you can't design for, you must design with. And it was wonderful to hear the Cleveland Clinic physicians speak about their work because they are part of the design and development process in the same way that we would need patients and nurses also involved when we're talking about medical systems. So in that view, you need a team. You need user researchers, you need engineers, designers, human factors researchers, folks who can turn really complex, hairy problems into something that's hopefully simple and intuitive to use. And then at the end of the day, meets a core need. It must address a problem statement. So with regards to artificial intelligence and machine learning, I want to talk about 4 elements that are really critical from our perspective, and that's regulation, it's data comprehension, it's liability, and then I want to end with accessibility to creation and invention. The first one I'll start with is regulation, and I want to call this regulation and surveillance, really. And Shawn touched on this. It's about how we, of course, release AI products, but then how do we monitor them over time? I'm a biomedical engineer, and I spent a lot of my career developing products and going through a burden of proof generation for FDA. They want to know that the product you're launching is the product you intended to launch, and that it in fact meets the needs of your users. And then it's critical that every year after that, as manufacturing evolves, as the product is on the market, that product is identical 3 years from now as the day you launched it. You want to know that change is controlled. That's an important tenet of medical device and pharmaceutical regulation. The interesting thing about artificial intelligence and machine learning is that second part, the learning. So as these algorithms are released, of course, simpler algorithms will, take an input, provide an output. But what happens as that technology continues to develop over time? Now, all of a sudden, the change control mechanisms that we have in place in the industry no longer apply the same way that they did in the past. We need to think about frameworks of boundaries and on-market surveillance that allow for some change and evolution. One of the points we heard in Austin is that as data is aggregated, it becomes more valuable. And that's a really cool idea. What it also means is that it can shift. And so as more data is added to it, the algorithm is making different inferences or decisions, and it starts to drift. So what are the guardrails that we're putting around this that we as product producers, along with FDA and any other global regulating body, that the product we've launched as it evolves is still acceptable to the original mission for which it was created? The second point I'll make is about data comprehension. One of the really cool points that Dr. Mihaljevic brought up is these multimodal data flows. So how can you pull from electronic health records and claims data and Medicare, Medicaid? How can you look at trends that are produced by millions of different devices that we interface with every day and make decisions about that? When that data is presented in a dashboard in a calm, cool, collected office, you can take your time with it. You can evaluate and understand it. But when we start providing this data, this flow of information in circumstances like surgery or driving or high stress, high pace environments, how are you ensuring that the user is getting the right data in the right format at the right time? And importantly, that we're not overwhelming the user with just constant data. Anyone who's been in an operating room or a hospital ward just knows that there's whirs and beeps and buzzes and lights. It can be overwhelming. And for those who are in that ecosystem constantly, it can be numbing, so that you are no longer listening to the insights that are being provided for you. So in that format, it's important that we have not only great AI developers and great care providers who are using it, but we have really excellent user experience designers, that we have really excellent human factors engineers, that we have teams that are interpreting what is most important for those users at that moment and providing it in a context and an interface that works for them at the right time that they need it. So then that comes to the point of liability. So when a user is interpreting this data, it's important to consider, are they making a decision? Dr. Jehi mentioned that they leave the clinician in the process, leave the person in the process. I think that's absolutely critical from a decision-making perspective. But as we look at artificial intelligence applied in diagnostics, therapeutics, and prognostics, a decision doesn't always look like give this drug or give that drug. Sometimes the decision is this data matters, that data does not matter. So when we consider these multimodal data streams, it's not always clear, as much transparency as we want to build into the algorithms, the machine learning systems, what it's including and what it's not including, what's an outlier, and what's important for this patient with their history and their region, their socioeconomic level, their race, their gender. All of those things have to come into play. And it's important that those data sets do reflect those communities, because it's going to be making decisions whether we consider it a decision or not, simply by inclusion or exclusion of data. And the final point I would like to talk about is accessibility. I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, because I also want to look very optimistically at what AI could do for us as creators, inventors, and as a nation that's built on entrepreneurship and development of new technologies. Artificial intelligence, while, as Shawn pointed out, has often been maligned as a job taker in some of these cases. How do we look at it as a not just a job creator, but a job focuser, that humans are doing what humans are best at? And in my world as an engineer, designer, people creating stuff, that means getting humans focused on invention and getting good ideas out there and then honing those ideas over time. So some technologies that I consider in that space are like natural language processing. Examples of it have been seen to write journal articles or press releases. It's also been able to create images, something called DALL-E 2. You can just describe an image and it will put it in front of you. And some of the examples they use is like a cat riding a horse dressed as an astronaut in the style of Monet. And then boom, that image is there. Maybe that image never existed before, but it's been created. How could we think about building frameworks and technologies that allow anybody to use that technology for invention? A great example are brainstorms that we're often in. We have industrial designers who create museum level illustrations in 30 seconds, and it's impressive and it's also intimidating. So when you bring in patients and nurses and doctors and engineers like myself into that process, we often say, well, I'm thinking about something that looks like this, but I can't really draw it. What do you think? And the idea doesn't go anywhere. Education and training often become gatekeepers to invention in that case. So how can we use these types of natural language processing evolution to empower more people to create ideas by lowering the level of fluency required with some of these technologies, turning computer-aided design, a CAD system, into a descriptive system rather than something where you're doing a million clicks to get a complex gear mechanism in place that really at the end of the day, you're trying to just enable an idea so that you can test it and then you can move technology forward. The way I see this really helping all of us is that it also allows more entry into fields like engineering and design, which often also come with heavy burdens of education, which usually disproportionately bias towards folks who have socioeconomic benefit towards those types of educations. This is a way of getting great minds together and taking away a lot of this barrier of routine that we've called education and training and really get down to the creation itself. And I want to conclude with a thought towards the importance of this commission and what we're doing. It's a privilege to be a part of this. And I want to reflect on an example of cameras because I love taking pictures myself. I'm an engineer, so I like to nerd about some of the technology developments. And one of those developments is the use of the Shirley card that was originally used to calibrate printers for analog printers by Kodak. And Shirley happened to be a woman who worked at Kodak. They took a picture of her. She also happened to be a white woman with a lot of colorful things in her clothes that for generations of photographers and people taking pictures was considered the normal, the standard for photography. As that technology developed and all of a sudden the JPEG was invented, there was a great opportunity to do something different. And yet there was a Lena that was developed that was used to program and verify the JPEG. Does JPEG A equal JPEG B? Again, another white woman. And it was only until this year, early last year, that we get cameras like the Pixel that are really looking at different types of skin tone, at getting true images of all humans and making sure that it's representative of the people we're trying to take photos of. And I mention that because the frameworks we're choosing now, we're going to echo into the future. A decision that Kodak made in 1930, 1940 still applied in 2021. And we've got an opportunity in 2022 to set a different mark. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ben. Next, we'll hear from.
I used to do this in Congress too. I'd always forget to turn on my mic. Thank you, Ben. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Tanya Berger-Wolf. She is the Director of Translational Data Analytics Institute and a professor of computer science engineering, electrical and computer engineering, as well as evolution, ecology, and organismal biology. That is a long title. Congratulations. At The Ohio State University. She is the director and co-founder of the Artificial Intelligence for Wildlife Conservation software nonprofit WildMe, home of the Wild Book Project, which brings together computer vision, crowdsourcing, and conservation. She holds a PhD in computer science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Berger-Wolf.
Thank you. Yes, I have 2 first names, 2 last names, and a lot of titles. It takes a while, introduction in one breath takes a very good breath control. So I came to OSU in January 2020, right before the world changed. And I came from Chicago, from University of Illinois, Chicago. I spent 15 years there. And I came to take this position of the director of the Translational Data Analytics Institute at OSU, which is the largest interdisciplinary research institute at this somewhat large university. The institute, the mission of the institute is translating data into insight to benefit the world. And it spans all our faculty, more than 250 faculty who are part of the institute, span all 15 colleges of the university and 62 departments by the last count. And it is that connection among all these interdisciplinary perspectives and ways of asking and answering questions that really allows us to, and as well as our connections to external partners, the healthcare institutions, government, nonprofits, industry, that allow us to translate data into insight to benefit the world. And some of the examples around healthcare, in addition to that are really the current research projects, many of them are in partnership with the College of Medicine, but the boundaries go way beyond in addition to the kind of projects that have been mentioned in the Cleveland Clinic and probably every other AI-enabled healthcare project, organization that does healthcare, AI-enabled healthcare is Drug and Discovery, Precision Pathology. But examples of really bringing together many different perspectives and AI and impact of AI in healthcare are things like speeding up code blue responses by taking engineering systems approaches and really bringing multimodal data, so saving lives by speeding up response. Identifying associations between mother's nutrition and the infant healthcare well-being, right? So this really looking at everything from closing food stores, grocery stores in different neighborhoods, and how that impacts downstream well-being of an infant. Improving drug compliance in cardiac patients, African-American patients, by understanding their relationship with a healthcare provider, right? Again, looking at a variety of different modalities of data, the breadth of sort of information that goes into understanding something like this was never possible without AI and without the data that we have. And more recently, also on-demand deployment of COVID tests. And we're part of this, so our team was part of I was leading the data analytics and modeling team responding for the state of Ohio, the daily reports to the governor early on, and now for the university. And we're part of that recommendation to the state on improving the equity of deployment of COVID tests that was mentioned before. And now to put our brains where our mouth is, we also created algorithms, literally solutions of how you could do that in an equitable way. And so with that, the points that I would like to make, I will take a more sort of research and technical perspective, because I think that that is something that I can bring to this conversation, which is unique, perhaps. So one is, yes, we all agree that AI must be regulated. But I would say that we focus a lot on the regulation of AI systems. I would argue that the regulation should be based on use, not of the system, right? Because the same system can be used in different contexts from different data, and it will be completely different. It should be completely differently regulated, essentially. But the problem is that we're all grappling that AI is hard to regulate because it is nothing like anything we've regulated before, right? For all the reasons that have been mentioned, because it's a regulating and ever-changing entity, because it changes as the data changes, the lifelong learning and all of this aspects. But part that we haven't mentioned is that it is in some cases provably impossible. It's not that we can, we haven't developed the research yet, that we haven't thought hard enough, that we haven't solved a particular problem. In some cases, it is provably impossible to comply with requirements of policy. Math doesn't work that way. So to give an example of what I'm talking about is, for a general given model, AI model, but even more process, and a data set to provide, to not even provide an instance, to answer the question, is there an individual bias instance in that data set for that model? Just don't even show it to me, but just yes or no. That is a provably undecidable question, as in general, we will not be able to mathematically answer this question. So it is that deep, right? And even if we simplify these to a large extent, to answer the question is still very, very, very hard, provably hard. And so it is, this is the type of regulation that we actually essentially cannot comply often, scientifically. So because of that, I would argue that there are three principles, and we all come up with our list of principles. So I have three broad ones that should be around AI regulations. So one is that the process of deployment of AI should be participatory and inclusive, and it's been mentioned several times already. And it's participatory and inclusive of people at all stages. So to me, that is that people whose data are used for training of the algorithms, those who create the algorithms themselves. And by the way, that regulation of those people, those who create the algorithms, is the only focus of the European AI Act. Of all the people that are there in the process, that's the only focus of the European AI Act. But to me, so those whose data I use, those who create the algorithms, those who use the data in healthcare, that means that those who use, the algorithms, the outcome of AI, that's the physician in this context. And those who are impacted, those are the patients, right? And even broader, the population, right? This is, we're talking public health beyond the well-being of communities, not only the patients themselves. And it's been mentioned by Dr. Jehi and by Shawn, these aspects. So all of this means that, yes, we need to inform people that their data are going to be used, that the decisions are going to be made by AI, that the solutions should be created with those whom they benefit, as Ben just mentioned, not for them. That there has to be diversity at every stage, in particular at the stage of creating AI systems, and that for that we need to build AI capacity. And we haven't talked about that really. We're lacking expertise at almost every stage of this process. The second aspect that I would like to see in AI addressed by the AI system regulation is the transparency and human accountability. And so I want to make a very perhaps technical distinction. We use the words explainable, interpretable, and transparent interchangeably. They are not. And explainable is hard, probably impossible. Interpretable is feasible. Transparent is doable and doable now. And so here's the difference. One of the best examples between explainable and interpretable that I've heard is a microwave, right? The explainable version of the microwave is it heats your food by using the microwave, and so then comes the physics, right? That's the explainable. The interpretable is if you press this button, your food will be heated for 30 seconds. Reliably and repeatedly. This action will, the input, right, repeatedly and reliably lead to the same outcome. So that is the level that we're hoping for AI. And that's the frontier of research of interpretable AI, that if you do this, this will come out. But there are caveats there because we're talking about lifelong learning, right? The algorithms that learn over the entire course of their deployment. So no, the same action will not produce the same outcome because the data have been changed, because the algorithm have learned on those data, and the outcomes will change. But transparent is doable and doable now. And here's what I mean by transparent. And again, Dr. Jehi spoke quite a bit to that. The transparent process, not the algorithms, but the process. So we need open source, and I understand that open source is not always possible. So it has to be accessible through maybe access control by certain people at certain times in certain contexts, verifiable and replicable. Right? It has to be open process of deployment and open and transparent process of deployment of AI systems. They have to come with clear assumptions, uncertainty, and limits of use. Right? You can't use it you can use this algorithm or this system in these circumstances, but not in these ones. It wasn't tested under these circumstances, for example. And so we also have to take. Humans have to be responsible, not the systems, right? Humans have to be responsible for the outcomes, and that there has to be a mechanism for adjusting AI systems based on discovered adverse outcomes or impact, undesired impact. Right now, we don't have anything in place that allows us to sort of throughout the life cycle of deployment of these systems to continue to change them if we need to. And the third point I would argue is the one that we talk about most typically, is the safe, effective, and socially beneficial AI system, right? They have to be addressed by the regulation. We have to have a process for staged and gradual deployment. So everybody, I think, and particularly Shawn and Ben, talked about continuous assessment, monitoring adverse effects, and a system for reporting adverse effects. So, okay, we've discovered them. How do they get back? And what happens with that discovery of adverse effects? We need to be able not only to adjust the algorithms, but to adjust the policy, right? If we find, because these things take a long time to surface quite often, the adverse effects. And then the do no harm, improving not only this do no harm, the oath that every physician takes. If we're starting to use AI in instances that impact the lives of individuals and the life of the planet itself quite often, then we need to take that do no harm oath. And it's not only preventing it and assessing adverse effects and bias and inequity, but this also means that it has to be an improvement on the existing systems and the existing solutions, right? And that is measurable. Bias is, and I'll talk in a little bit, bias and equity and adverse effects are actually often hard to measure in algorithms and in systems, but improvement on existing is easy. And the other aspect, it has to take the cost into account. So this do no harm, because deploying AI systems is costly. You quite often have to change the entire system around the AI system. Healthcare is a great point in case in point. But there's also AI systems are costly in terms of not only money and effort, but also come with a huge environmental cost, right? The hardware that has rare metals, the energy and the water requirements for AI, for the AI solutions are incredibly expensive, and the CO2 footprint, the carbon footprint is huge. So the do no harm, I would argue, has to address that. And then, like the last 2 points of, like the last aspect of the safety, safe, effective, and socially beneficial are the data governance. And the data governance we've had, so the big data started becoming big about 20 years ago, right? When the storage became cheap. It took us 20 years to get to the point where we have positions of data governance almost in every big enterprise. But with the advent of AI, which is about 7 years, like big AI, I hope we don't wait for another 20 years to regulate it and to have positions sort of people who can understand the process and to make it an enterprise level priority to have responsible and fair and equitable and ethical deployment of AI systems. The data governance also changes with deployment of AI. I spoke a little bit before to some that privacy regulation, we can ensure privacy in the data set itself. When you bring AI, de-identified information can become identifiable again. Predictions can be made based on completely what we would think of unusable and publicly available data by combining data sources, by using your friend's data to predict yours, and so on and so forth. So we have to rethink data governance in the age of AI. And fairness and bias, including algorithmic bias, which was kind of glossed over. And again, it's glossed over also. We talk about a lot about data fairness and bias and the impact fairness and bias. But the algorithmic bias, again, something that EU AI Act talks about, but doesn't do anything about at all. And I can bring a couple of examples, but the thing is that unbiased data can lead to biased algorithms and vice versa. So bias is neither good or bad in and of itself. It's the question is harmful bias, and the interplay between the data and algorithms can go either way, and we have to take that into account. And it is actually, again, the boundary, the real frontier of research, part of my research as well, of assessing algorithmic bias in AI algorithms. For example, one of the recent examples in healthcare comes from insurance companies' realm of algorithms that are used for insurance by insurance company to predict the level of healthcare. Turned out to be using a proxy of previous cost of healthcare for a patient, and that was in and of itself already biased among the different ethnic groups, and therefore underpredicted the level of healthcare for African American patients. Right? It's subtle. You don't see the data were not biased initially. It's the algorithm's salient feature for the prediction. That's what made it biased. And there is also the one of aspects of AI algorithms in general is over and under diagnosis, because when we report accuracy, that 8% that was mentioned, 8% error, how is that error distributed among different demographic groups? That's the question of equity, right? Especially 8% can be a lot when you're talking, if 8% of your patients are African Americans or Asian, and it is for them that you're completely sort of all the error is concentrated in those demographic groups. Quite often, it's very, very, very hard to detect, and in some cases, impossible, right? Just provably impossible. So what do we do with that? And I think I want to close with a future that I do think that the future is in the responsible and trustworthy human AI partnership. One of the, again, sort of research projects that we're focusing, the conversational AI was mentioned, conversational AI to help physicians to deal with the transcriptions. That a very tiny, tiny use of conversational AI. We're working on a project where we can help not only create conversational AI, leverage conversational AI and intelligent agents to not only help physicians, but teams of physicians and patients to engage patients to explain what healthcare they're going to receive. What does it mean that AI is going to be part of it? So use AI to explain AI, yes, because it's hard, data use agreements and so on, to engage them in that conversation and answer questions, but also help physician teams to interact with each other, interact with data, so they're not overwhelmed by data right away. And when they point to the screen saying, I see something here, it is AI that can pull out and understand what they're talking about and engage the rest of the team. So that hopefully is the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have Dr. Eckert available virtually?
Hi there.
Great, thank you. Dr. Carly Eckert is the Executive Vice President at Olive, based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. At Olive, Dr. Eckert combines experience as a clinical physician, epidemiologist, and informationalist to advance innovation in healthcare with equity by design. She's a graduate of the University of Washington School of Public Health and the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. Dr. Eckert.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you to the Chamber and Commission members, as well as the clinic, for hosting. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this important conversation today on behalf of Olive. I know we're a bit over time, so I will keep my comments short and hit some of the high points. And I assure you, I didn't coordinate my comments with the other panelists, but it does goes to show how industry and academia are aligned on many of these goals and objectives. As you mentioned, I am a physician by training, as well as a clinical informaticist and epidemiologist. I've worked in health innovation for about a decade, including collaborating closely with data scientists, developing and implementing machine learning solutions in healthcare. I have a particular interest in AI governance, socially responsible technology, and community impact. Additionally, I'm a doctoral student at the University of Washington, where I study transfer learning and trauma outcomes prediction. At Olive, I lead a product team focused on developing innovation for providers and patients. As many of us know, healthcare is a special industry. As a physician, the delivery of care and the provider experience is really personal to me. I empathize with providers today and the challenges they face in delivering the best care possible. As a patient, I'm awed by the complexity of a system meant to treat the sick and to keep people well. Patients are often forced to navigate an unfamiliar and complex system alone, resulting in delays and lack of access to care. There are so many layers to this industry and this vocation, and these are opportunities for collaboration and innovation to alleviate the complexity for patients and reduce burnout for healthcare workers. Over the last several decades, healthcare has gone through a boom of systems created to address digitization. From moving paper medical records to the digital desktop, engaging with patients to schedule or cancel an appointment through a mobile platform, and apps to networks to exchange patient data. While efforts have been made, true connectivity and interoperability are lacking. And due to this lack of connectivity, humans act as data routers between disparate and segmented systems. And this creates a lot of administrative burden and waste. Administrative costs make up 1/3 of total healthcare expenditures, which is about twice the percent that Canada spends. There's an estimated $760 billion a year wasted as well in inefficient or unnecessary services. And we know that AI and automation have so much potential to transform how healthcare is delivered. As the previous panelists have noted, there's a real opportunity to use automation in the places where humans aren't needed. This can boost productivity, decrease the number of mistakes that humans make, and prevent costly errors. This also frees up our human workers to really do the tasks that we're best at. It allows us to harness creativity to solve complex problems. It gives us the time to do that and to advance healthcare even further. And this really allows us to do more meaningful work, which can actually, increase the ROI for their employers. I'd like to touch on interoperability a bit, which is really a critical component of our work at Olive, and more importantly, critical to unlocking improved and seamless care for patients. So interoperability is the ability of different information systems to access, exchange, integrate, and cooperatively use data in a coordinated manner within and across organizational, regional, and national boundaries to provide timely and seamless portability of information. And it's really important to optimize the health of individuals as well as populations. Interop standards enable data to be accessed and shared appropriately and securely across the spectrum of care. We're driving the importance of interoperability with a focus on data exchange between our solutions and electronic health records, as well as with other advanced health exchange networks. And at its fullest, data interoperability allows patients to share health information across systems instantly, thereby removing barriers to care and reducing delays. There's been a lot of other comments made about kind of AI governance, and I would just like to reiterate really the importance of thinking about these technologies and these models within socio-technical systems. it's really critical that we think about these as living and breathing models as the data changes, as the population changes. There's really what I call three axes of distributive justice when we think about both how models perform, also then how care decisions are made, and then how patient outcomes kind of follow that as well. I'd also like to talk about the replicability and limits of use that were brought up by Dr. Berger-Wolf, and about facilitating data sharing. Again, I would like to thank the Commission for the opportunity to share my thoughts today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eckert. As Dr. Eckert mentioned, we are over time on this panel, but what I'm going to try to do is, let's say we'll do 2 questions, and what I'd love to do is prioritize the folks who didn't get to ask a question on the last panel. So I see a hand. Okay, 2. We have 2 right here. Neither of you guys asked questions the last panel, right? All right. You are 2 questions.
The American Enterprise Institute. I'm curious. I was at a meeting out at Stanford, the 30th AI project, and the philosopher Robert Shawn talked about ethical guidelines for development and use. He pointed out that government is always going to be behind. We can't keep up with what you're creating, and suggested that professional norms need to fill the gap in making and creating ethical guidelines, so that government has time to do the kind of reflection and policy development that it does. And I'm curious from any or all of you
what you think of that idea. Do our professional associations of developers and researchers and users of AI, are they able to do that? Does that sound plausible to you?
Not only it's plausible, but this is exactly the conversations that are happening right now, because there are no laws, policy, or regulation. The only path forward is ethical use and agreeing that we're all going to some ethical norms. So Association for Computing Machines developed its code of ethics, and IEEE, the Institute for Electronic Engineering. Yes. So those are 2 main professional organizations that govern essentially computer science and computational solutions, engineering solutions. The Association for Computing Machines Code of Ethics, which was voluntarily created without any regulation of software, before any regulation of software, has been updated to include ethical norms for use of AI systems. The main research conference, research gathering, of machine learning and AI experts has added ethical review to its research papers, publications 3 years ago, created a lot of unease first, but the conversation is still ongoing. But yes, and I think that what I'm very heartened to see that the conversations about ethical and responsible AI used to be constrained essentially to the computer science, broadly computational community, and maybe statistics until about 3-5 years ago. And now we're having these conversations with policymakers, applied ethicists, social sciences, lawyers, or at least law professionals of some form. And that's exactly where the conversations have to be, not within the discipline. And I'll pass it on to business.
Yeah, I would add from an engineering perspective, there's professional engineers licenses, architecture. You mentioned the Hippocratic Oath, of course. I think that's important. And as we also have new roles like chief data officer, chief information officer, chief research and innovation officers, do we need chief ethicists and things like that in industry as well? I think that's important. I think it's also why we need to have, as multiple people have mentioned, transparent process. So if you bring in, we've talked a lot about patients, but a lot of AI is first being rolled out in other industries, warehouses, logistics, HR, finance. if you bring those folks in and the first response you get is a cringe, you probably should take a look at that. And I think that's a really important part of the process, not just a kind of a governing body within these, but making sure that that kind of transparency is just built in from day one.
Yeah. From my perspective, I think what you mentioned make total sense. I think we gotta empower the creators and users of AI to provide input and help define the clear standard, and then leverage the government bodies to really help orchestrate and align different point of views together, and then also really kind of govern more from the outcome perspective instead of looking at the process, looking at technology itself. So having clear definition of outcome is important. And leveraging the professional input is very important, especially both for AI creators and users.
Dr. Eckert, did you have any comment on that question?
No, I was unable to hear the question. I apologize.
Our apologies. Shikar, why don't you go, just make sure we're using the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. This is Shekhar from Bank of America. My background is not healthcare, so I'm just soaking in a lot of information you're sharing. So I'm going to ask a question more from an individual perspective, right? Which is, the question really is, do we have the right systems in the US across all this different players and stakeholders for driving the right care and innovation, right healthcare and innovation? And I ask this because I hear, Shawn, you talked about how you use AI for cardiac patients prediction. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, you're going to use the insurance data, right? But on the other hand, if insurance data is being used by hospitals, right, sometimes doctors might be motivated by putting a higher code, still legal, higher code. And if you use that data, you're going to be highly biased. So here's a case where the system with various stakeholders are not necessarily driven with the right objective. And I'm a little bit lost. My question really is, do we have the right information systems that need to come together across all the stakeholders to drive the right care and innovation?
Maybe starting with
Dr.
Dr. Eckert. Yeah.
Dr. Eckert, I'm going to give you first crack at that one. Did you hear the question, first of all?
I did. It's a good question. I think it gets to some of the points, right, about how is the data collected that we're using in all of our models and across all of the work that we're doing. We've been using models for a long time in healthcare, but they were not necessarily produced by AI in the past, right? But we've had risk scores and risk stratification and things like that were not always built on balanced data sets as well. So I think we're getting better. I think we are realizing that there's different ways we can integrate data that is across the spectrum of care and across, the data that is, even outside of care that then affects how care is delivered. So all that to say, I think we're getting there.
I would say that's an aspiration. But I would say that we're still in the process and probably early in that process. Only recently we agreed on for example, only recently we switched from the main genomic data sets that were initially to understand population level associations in genome with diseases. The biggest data sets initially were one from Iceland, one from Japan, intentionally collected to minimize the variation of all other factor other than the genome sequence, right? They're clearly not a very great data set for a lot of the questions that we want to ask. A lot of data right now about COVID, for example, is coming from Europe, because the collection policies and insurance policies, health insurance is very different there. So we're getting a lot of data, but two people most distantly, sort of most genetically diverse people from Europe are still let's put it this way, genetic variation in Europe is much smaller than in the US and certainly in Africa, for example. So even at that basic level, no, we don't have the same system. We don't have good processes, yes, for data interoperability, as was mentioned, and for transitioning, as Dr. Jehi, I was heartened to see that Cleveland Clinic has a position of somebody who ensures that the clinical data can be used for research and the research can be deployed right away. There are very, very, very few examples of that, like less than 5, fewer than 5.
Okay, as this commission learned in Austin, I'm the bad guy. So I want to thank our second panel. This was fantastic. Very much appreciate your testimony and answering questions. It is 2:35, and at 2:40, I'm going to gavel in the third panel, whether you're here or not. It's 2:40, and I'm going to keep my promise. Thank you very much to our third panel. I know the rest of our commissioners will be in shortly. I'm just going to go again in the order of the piece of paper in front of me. First, we're going to hear from Cheryl Oldham. Cheryl is the Vice President of Education Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Senior Vice President of Education and Workforce at the Chamber of Commerce Foundation. The Education Workforce Program, quote, connects the best minds in American business with the most innovative thinkers in education and training, helping them to work together to preserve the strength of America's greatest economic resource, its workforce. She has 20 years of experience in public policy development and implementation, as well as in project management and government relations. Her previous experience includes serving for 8 years in President George W. Bush's administration. I'd be interested to know how many people did all 8 years.
Not that many.
I know. Someone told me there were 11 who survived 8 years in the White House, but I don't know if that
I wasn't in the White
actually
House.
true. Let's see, where was I? Sorry. In July of
You
2008.
can stop there.
Okay. Okay, Cheryl, go ahead.
We got to cut this down. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and commissioners, for having the U.S. Chamber here to testify about our work in workforce. Obviously, as the largest organization representing the interests of business in the world, we are laser focused on the issues that are most important to the employer community, and workforce right now is front and center. As you all stated in your request for information last week, the future of work is here. AI will certainly disrupt the workforce, change some jobs, create new ones, and yes, displace some. And so we need to do two things. We need to minimize any negative disruption, and then we need to put AI to work for the American workforce. And that's how I'm going to frame my remarks around those two buckets. In terms of minimizing any negative disruption, I wanted to spend 1 minute and just a plea to you all, I guess, to not forget about the importance of our K through 12 system in this conversation. Planning for the future, or frankly, planning for the now, starts in our schools. And if we're trying to address our workforce challenges by starting post-high school, we're failing. We've taken our collective eye off the ball when it comes to reading and math and measurement and accountability for the academic achievement of all kids, regardless of income or race. Many of our kids are behind. They were before the pandemic, and they're falling further as a result of the last 2 years. We know the biggest challenges have been in minority communities, low-income communities, and for students with disabilities. It's hard to think or talk about the high-skill tech jobs of an AI world when we're not meeting the basics for so many of our kids. As has already been said and acknowledged, technology certainly has an impact on jobs. Those jobs and our tasks that are easily routinized, and new jobs are emerging and fast. And so we ask ourselves the question in the chamber, do we have a talent development system in this country that can keep pace with the change? Is it nimble enough to respond when skill requirements change and new jobs are created? Is it able to train Americans for the jobs available today and then pivot and train them for the jobs that become available tomorrow? We need a system that develops the talent companies and communities need and ensures Americans have the skills required for the jobs of today and tomorrow, one that is actually fit to minimize that disruption. The work of the Chamber and Chamber Foundation, the work that we have been leading for a number of years under what we call America Works, is focused on ensuring we have that talent development system. And we've done so by addressing three key challenges. One, in partnerships between employers and the education system. Two, in the data that allows for better communication between the two. And third, in financing the education and training that American workers need. I'm going to focus on the first two. In order to be truly agile and able to pivot when disruption occurs, it's our belief that employers must play a much larger role than they have traditionally played in workforce development. This is more important than ever as we begin to integrate emerging technologies like AI into jobs and industries. We need to proactively lean into workforce development and make it more authentically employer-led if we're going to minimize any labor market disruptions while also building new and effective pathways that will lead to AI-related jobs. Using the Chamber Foundation's approach, we're positioning employers as end customers of talent supply chains. And when jobs change and skill requirements are adjusted, it's the businesses that employ the workers that must signal those changes more clearly and rapidly. This means taking a whole new approach to HR, talent acquisition, and talent development. 8 years ago, the Chamber Foundation conceived of a pilot initiative called Talent Pipeline Management, a set of strategies and training for business intermediaries and employers based on the principles of supply chain management, a data-driven end-to-end process for creating pipelines of talent for new hires, for upskilling and reskilling, and for diversifying the workforce. It is this type of intentionality around ensuring that the training delivered aligns with the needs of the job that will ensure that when jobs change, employers are able to signal to the education system those changes, and they are then able to adjust their programs to better serve the student or job seeker. This issue of signaling is really important, and while the hard work has to be done by the humans within the companies and the partnerships with preferred providers of talent need to be built and cultivated, there's also this very important data component. The labor market's changing fast. The data we rely on to determine which jobs are open, what industries are growing, what skills are needed is outdated and slow. Bad data means inaccurate information about what our economy needs. American workers need current and reliable information about job opportunities and which education programs best prepare students for success. Modernizing education and employment records can improve job search outcomes and match job seekers with open jobs. Today, the public and private sector, or together, the public and private sector can develop the infrastructure that will allow for the collection and use of jobs and employment data to improve labor market information and empower people to use their own records to pursue opportunities and career advancement. The Chamber Foundation leads what's called the T3 Innovation Network. It's an open network of hundreds of organizations and professionals committed to building the data infrastructure necessary to make all learning count, to enable skills to function like currency, and to empower learners and workers with data. Technology, including AI, when applied in the right way, can help unlock and connect people to opportunity, including ensuring people are matched to the right jobs and the right education and workforce pathways. We will also give employers and their HR systems the tools they need to hire based on skill and to better assess an individual's fit for a job or career advancement. Shifting quickly to making AI work for the workforce, there's certainly many opportunities with AI and machine learning, but we have so much more to do to unlock those opportunities. We believe technology is going to make our workforce development system better, particularly for the individuals who may not have a degree, the veterans, an adult worker who is looking to move on or up in their career and in desperate need of a system that can see their value, assess the skills they have, translate them across new jobs, and match them to a new career. We have long seen the role of technology and AI as a major asset in transforming education and workforce development. We've led the private sector, government agencies, education and workforce stakeholders in helping to facilitate the digital transformation of the talent marketplace. I mentioned the T3 Innovation Network. Through that collective action, both public and private partners are working together to unlock the potential of technology and AI to bring about a more equitable system. This year, we're working with partners to document high priority use cases for how data standards and AI technology can help improve education and HR workflow processes. We're also investing considerably in supporting public and private stakeholders in improving data held by employers themselves. It's called the Jobs and Employment Data Exchange. We're supporting the implementation and adoption of data standards for jobs and employment records. Through this widespread adoption and use of data standards, we can positively disrupt how employers organize and share data with government agencies and even with workers themselves. And when we're successful, we will produce more and better data than ever before on the labor market and its outcomes, ushering in a new generation of talent analytics for the public and private sectors, as well as producing new data that can support and improve applications and services. Not only could AI use this data to deliver new services and predictive analytics, but such rich, structured, machine actionable data can also be leveraged to train and improve AI tools for the education and workforce sectors. I think I'm going to stop there because I feel like I might have been going on and we got a lot to get to.
Cheryl.
So much more to say.
Cheryl, thank you very much. Next is Richard Cardwell. He's the Vice President of Infosys, Head of Innovation and Delivery in the Midwest region. He has an MBA from Indiana Wesleyan University. Richard, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So I have I think the privilege of evolving my career from being, let's say, a domain expert and a technology expert to now more of a generalist. And, I kind of say that because I work for an organization now, Infosys, which is a technology company that obviously provides, business consulting and IT services and outsourcing services globally. So we're a multinational company. We employ over 250,000 people globally. And when you think of a traditional IT company, you think hardware, software, and we're not. We're a services company through and through. So what I affectionately say is we sell brain power by the hour. So we hire, train, and deploy our own people to work with nearly 2,000 clients across the globe and some of the biggest and best brands, across the world. And we help them as part of their digital transformation journey. And we do so while we remain, domain, let's say industry, platform, software agnostic. So we do make our own tools, our own software, but we try to stay solution and software agnostic as much as possible. And we understand there's a lot of confusion and hesitancy and misunderstanding about AI. It's been rather anthropomorphized, if you will, and linked to human beings, but really it needs to evolve beyond what a human can do and what we're capable of doing. And we know that, as we've heard today, AI can impact us all. It's already started to, but it's still in its infancy. And so if I use a baseball analogy, this is the first pitch of the first inning of a 7-game World Series. So this is a generational transformation. It's not a destination. AI is not. So, just want to make sure that we kind of put that out there and what our philosophy is about AI. But no industry vertical will be safe. And
Sorry, I was trying to.
That's all right. So no industry vertical will remain safe from its capabilities or to at least remain competitive. So everyone will be impacted by it. And what makes Infosys, our situation a bit unique is that we're not just consumers of AI. We're also builders of it. We implement it. We have our own in-house educators and training curriculum to train our employees on how to design, develop, and deploy those tools. And so that said, we're constantly looking internally and externally for thought leadership and for guidance and perspective, while we simultaneously relying on our people and some of our ecosystem of partnerships, whether that be data scientists or software engineers and others, to actually build those tools that are necessary to make AI possible. And given that I think I have this purview now of looking across multiple industries, whether it be manufacturing, healthcare, pharma, life sciences, retail, there's a lot of common themes in terms of problems that are in those industries. And there's a lot of rigidity in systems today. And much like human beings, hardware, software erodes, it decays, it breaks. No one's walking around with an iPhone 3G anymore from 2007, and that's for a reason. The technology's evolved, it's gotten better, it's added more value and capabilities to our life. And so we think enabling AI, if you power that within the ecosystem of an industry, and we can pick on healthcare since we're here, but really connect that to a digital platform, and that can really unlock a lot of value around managing risk, lowering cost of healthcare, and looking at an array of delivery of health mechanisms in terms of patient treatment. And really what that does is it provides a different experience for patients. It gives you better access to data and insights. It unlocks your ability to innovate more and further and accelerate time to market of, fill in the blank, whether that be a medicine, a treatment, access to a particular healthcare provider. But one of the items we've talked about and hinted at, yes, we've said data privacy, but what data is digital. And what we're not saying is cybersecurity. There has to be cybersecurity as part of the conversation with respect to AI and any of its subtools, whether it be machine learning, neural networks, et cetera. And so we, from my point of view, and I can speak on behalf of Infosys, that, we want to have a hand in the destination of where this is headed. And if you think about, let's say on one end of the spectrum, you have social media and sports and entertainment on the left, and you have healthcare and let's say wealth management or banking finance on the right. I'd kind of like to close with these 4 points. In one side of that spectrum, your personal data and what you're willing to give up is rewarded. It's incentivized. To post, to share, to like, geolocate how you transact, interact, and what you're learning about real time. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, the data is locked down. And there's a lot of different varying degrees of policy around it and laws and language. But keep in mind that there needs to be an evolution of best practices from left to right. And there's going to be some overlap, but not completely. But the guiding principles of how AI is designed and developed and deployed, there will be some overlap as you move from left to right, because the tools will generically be the same, even though the language might be different on which it's written in. And so what I think is also critical, but could be universally applied across that spectrum, are the ethics around it. And what are you using the data for? I don't think that should be nuanced by industry. Given I'm willing to give up a lot of data privacy if I have a Facebook page, versus if I go talk to my wealth manager and all of my asset classes, I want that locked down and no one to be able to see it. I'm not going to post and share that. But I would employ the group to think about this. Leave room for creativity. This is still way in its infancy. Leave room for us to make mistakes. We need to have capacity to learn and experiment, and I think that's okay. Yeah, I'll close there.
Super, thank you, Richard. Next is Rick Carfagna. I'm part Italian. Did I get that right?
Yes, Carfagna, rhymes with lasagna.
Yes, exactly. Rick is a senior vice president of the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, oversees all government affairs and public policy. He's currently in his third term in the Ohio House of Representatives. I would say, God bless someone who's wanted to put their name on a ballot. Where he represents the 68th House District and includes parts of Delaware County and all of Knox County. Rick, go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm now with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. I'm just under 2 months removed from serving in the Ohio House. I was a member of House leadership at the time. And during my 5 years, my 3 terms in office, I sponsored a variety of technology related bills. So being here and listening to some of this conversation, it's very refreshing. So I appreciate the opportunity to be among all of you today. So when I offer up my remarks, just bear in mind it's going to be more from what I believe is a snapshot of Ohio, but also kind of relating as a policymaker. And I think some of the more fundamental areas that I think we need to focus on to make not only our state, but also our country, I think, more conducive to AI and to any forms of innovation out there. When we canvass our chamber members on immediate challenges, I mean, again, to echo what's already been said, the universal response continues to be workforce. And we recognize that workforce anymore, it's beyond job credentialing, it's beyond job training. To have a qualified, reliable, and stable base of employees available to Ohio businesses, any discussion of workforce has to include access to transportation, to childcare, to affordable housing. Now, granted, those are all topics for another day, but I have to get that out of the way because I usually offer that up anytime I speak these days. As a state, we have a lot working in our favor, and welcome all of you to the Buckeye State, by the way. We have a low cost of living, a high quality of life, and if Ohio were a separate country, it would be the world's 21st largest economy, and we have plenty to leverage. We have great higher education options, transportation systems, ample sources of low cost electricity, and a mild climate. And with the increased use of technology like AI, 3D printing, virtual reality, and with emerging fields such as fintech, blockchain, biohealth, Ohio needs to remain future focused to stay competitive. And as was just said, we also need to lead the way when it comes to cybersecurity because it's everyone's responsibility. We stand to lose regardless of even if we're consciously aware. We have foreign countries actively looking to compromise our defense systems, our intelligence networks, and our economic security. But when we look in the mirror of what we need to do to lure innovation to our states, we feel it's important to assess some of the opportunities that we do have in place. And here in Ohio, we are uniquely situated post-pandemic to capitalize on the surge in online commerce and the proliferation of cloud-based services. For example, so we have here in Ohio more than 120 data centers. At least 50 of them are in Central Ohio, and those represent billions of dollars in investment. And while they don't supply many jobs, the construction of the typical project can create 1,000 jobs or more. And once finished, those data centers often need about 150 electricians, plumbers, and other skilled trades to maintain operations. And so we're ideally suited for data centers because there is little risk of earthquakes, hurricanes, flooding, or tornadoes. We've also welcomed a variety of fulfillment centers and warehouses across the state to the point where in the Central Ohio region alone, where I'm from, we are the 11th largest distribution center in the US. And we can do this when we have a highway system that positions us within a 10-hour drive of about half the US population. But again, you have to put all these pieces together. It's location, it's infrastructure, it's workforce, and it's transportation. I can't go anywhere being from Central Ohio without at least bragging about the Intel investment that was recently announced. So there's been much excitement about their announcement to invest $20 billion to upwards of $100 billion to manufacture semiconductors in Licking County in Central Ohio. And we anticipate construction to start this fall with a goal of opening those plants in 2025. It would make it really one of the largest semiconductor sites in the entire world. I can go over all the job details, but I won't bore you with that. But I will say that the pandemic has really changed how we do business, not just as a state, but really as a country. And it's also laid bare a lot of the technological disparities that we have. And here in Ohio, one of those was broadband availability. We can talk about all the great strides that were made in telemedicine throughout the pandemic. But if you don't have a high-speed internet connection in order to apply those services, especially in areas where you lack healthcare resources, healthcare personnel, it's frankly a wasted resource. So I was able to champion a piece of legislation that got through, and proud to say that recently $232 million was awarded in state grants to offset a lot of broadband construction in unserved areas. But really, two areas I want to go into are two areas that were frankly already mentioned. One being computer science, the other one being data privacy, because I did do some work in those areas. But if we want to be a technology proficient workforce, if we want our children to be prepared to compete in a 21st century advanced manufacturing economy and equipped with the skill sets for jobs that have yet to even be invented. We have to do a better job in Ohio and throughout the US to integrate computer science offerings at the K-12 level. Nationally, just 51% of high schools offer computer science, while 67% of all new jobs in STEM are in computing, and only 11% of STEM bachelor's degrees are in computer science. So we need to change the narrative in our education system that computer science isn't vocational, it's foundational. And it's not just about cultivating workers for Intel, which we certainly need. It's for Scotts Miracle-Gro, it's for Ernst & Young, it's for Kroger, it's for Procter & Gamble, and every other major employer throughout our state, because every industry has a need right now and in the future for computer programmers and for IT personnel. There was a piece of legislation that I sponsored when I was a freshman that got signed into law that created K-12 computer science standards and model curriculum. But beyond that, it gave high school students the flexibility to take a computer science class and apply that towards the 20 units that they have to take in order to receive a high school diploma. So, for example, you have to take 4 units of math, 3 units of science, 5 units of an elective. So now, if you wanted to take a web design class instead of, say, astronomy, you can do that and it'll count towards one of your science units. If you wanted to take a coding class in lieu of, say, Algebra 2, you can do that and it will satisfy one of your units of math. It's been very, very well received. And, I'm happy because I think it exposes our kids to an expanded menu of options, but also to options, quite frankly, that are going to be challenging and inspire creativity and innovation. Again, I think better prepare them for the economy that lies ahead. Code.org was an organization I worked very closely with, and around the time that legislation took effect, 63% of our public K-12 school districts had zero offerings of computer science classes at the high school level. And as of 2020, we're at about 50% of Ohio high schools that teach a foundational course in computer science. And that frankly puts our kids at a very severe skill set disadvantage. And so in the most recent state budget that was passed last year, we inserted a number of computer science measures in there, but I think the challenge is seeing those through and coming up with some more permanent solutions. For example, computer science education licensure. That's one of the big impediments. We just simply don't have faculty members to teach coding classes or to teach app development and all of these other courses. So, we extended the ability for a teacher that has a valid educator license in grades 7 through 12 to teach a computer science course if they complete a professional development program that's approved by the district superintendent or the school principal. But, that's a Band-Aid on the problem. We have to adopt a more permanent approach to cross-train existing teachers to teach courses or just outright develop more computer science dedicated faculty. And we have a variety of partners ranging from Battelle to JP Morgan Chase, Cleveland State University here in town, and other partners that are committed to a more permanent solution to that. Also in the state budget, we put forward a state plan for computer science education. And so our Department of Education is working in consultation with the Department of Higher Education to come up with a state plan to incorporate more computer science curriculum by September 30th. Well, the plan has to be done by September 30th of this year. And there's a lot of topics that need to be considered, best practices and challenges associated with implementing more curriculum at the K-12 level, benchmarks to create a more sustainable supply of teachers, a potential requirement for all students to complete a computer science course prior to their high school graduation, so on and so forth. I don't want to bore you with all those details. But one of the other things that we did do was to try to ensure more alignment at the higher ed level. As I said, we put the law in place to allow high school kids to take more computer science offerings and in lieu of their math or their science or their elective requirements. We want to make sure, though, that there's more of a seamless transition when they go off to college. And so beginning with the 2022-23 academic year, we required every state university to recognize a student's successful completion of an advanced computer science course in high school as a unit for admission to the university under certain circumstances. So if a public university in Ohio requires a general math requirement and you've satisfied that through a computer science class, again, it'll translate over to the higher ed level. And I want to shift now to data privacy. This was a fairly large, complex bill that I was working on before I departed for the Ohio Chamber. And I'll just preface it by saying that our data is obviously more exposed now than ever. And that digital exposure is only growing. Our info is collected by a variety of entities used either for their own purposes or to sell to other entities in certain circumstances. So, we recognize that as that data continually gets exchanged, it's vulnerable to identity theft, to financial fraud, and to other costly consumer problems if it's inadequately protected. There is no national standard regarding the regulation for regulating the collection and use of personal information. Ohio has zero protections on the books. And as many of you may know, there are only 3 states, California, Virginia, Colorado, that have actually enacted data privacy statutes. Many more of those are in the early stages of development. Here in Ohio, it was House Bill 376. And what we did was we wanted to create kind of a list of certain consumer rights, including the right to access their personal data and obtain a copy of such in a portable format, the right to correct any inaccuracies, the right to delete any personal data provided by or obtained about them, and the right to opt out of the sale of their data or use of that data for targeted advertising. We also created a consumer right to appeal at the Ohio Attorney General's office, who we propose designating as the exclusive authority to enforce that statute. We did have a variety of exemptions for businesses that are already subjected to or regulated by Graham-Leach-Bliley, HIPAA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and a variety of other frameworks that are already in place. We want to be firm, but we want to be fair. And and on the business side of things, there are 2 things that we want to do. First is that we wanted to have no private right of action. Again, we were going to have our state attorney general's office and their Consumer Protection Bureau be the one to enforce this. But we also wanted to provide an affirmative defense if a company that was subjected to this is compliant with really the NIST privacy framework. We identify NIST as kind of that gold standard for when it comes to cybersecurity standards. So as long as a company was compliant with NIST, kept it up to date, that it was scalable given their entity's size and nature, they would be provided with those liability protections. And it was very well received across the business community. But frankly, it's the bill, we got it out of committee on a party line vote. We were hoping to get some floor action on it, and it got hung up in caucus. And I'm a Republican, and it got hung up in my own caucus because we had individuals that wanted a private right to action. There are some that have an aversion to doing anything perceived as helping, quote unquote, big tech. There's a perception about these being unnecessary corporate giveaways and, a variety of other things. But I'll try to wrap it up here, and I apologize for rambling. We really have a void at the state legislative level when it comes to tech policy, and we need to elect individuals who will embrace technology and innovation as vehicles for growth and prosperity as opposed to demonizing it. And there is a lot of great momentum in our governor's office, particularly through the endeavors that our lieutenant governor is working on through Innovate Ohio, Cyber Ohio, and Broadband Ohio. And finally, with regards to Intel, we spoke with company representatives, and they said Ohio was not the most lucrative when it came to our package of incentives. But chief among the variables that sold them on our state, including land availability and the lack of seismic activity, was the degree of coordination and solidarity that they witnessed at the local, county, state, and federal levels of government. So at the end of the day, if we want to promote artificial intelligence, fintech, blockchain, biohealth, we need to have that same alignment of political will. So thank you for indulging me, and happy to take any questions when we're done.
Thank you, Rick. Elizabeth Hyman, is the Chief Executive Officer of XR Association, the trade association representing the technology manufacturers that power the virtual, augmented, and mixed reality industries. XRA is dedicated to the responsible development and thoughtful advancement of XR technologies across the globe. Elizabeth, go ahead. I'm just going to give my commissioners a quick warning. When she's finished, we're going to have time maybe for 2 questions. I'm going to prioritize folks who haven't gotten to ask a question. We're going to have about 5 minutes to do both of those. So Elizabeth, go ahead.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm going to try and make this fairly concise and brief, but I'm a use case here. The virtual, augmented, and mixed reality technologies more and more will be interrelated with artificial intelligence, machine learning to power a lot of the applications. And we're seeing amazing applications. I actually really appreciated being here to hear the folks from Cleveland Clinic. I just recently went to a conference around virtual reality and health applications, and it is absolutely inspiring to see how this is being applied for therapeutic purposes and wellness overall. There are also wonderful use cases across manufacturing and retail and education and you name it. But sort of a through line is how the leading edge right now is in workforce training and development. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the research that we did just with HR professionals, just to see what were they thinking about XR and how it might play into their needs. And they're really focused on, no surprise, training and upskilling, finding and retaining top talent, and doing so with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those were some top line results that we got. We also got very encouraging results in terms of the use of XR to achieve these purposes. More than 45, 48% of those HR professionals are saying that they're already using XR or they want to use XR for these purposes. So that was great. And I think we're at a point now where XR is sort of the ultimate tool for people to be able to learn, see, and do all at once. And by the way, XR is an umbrella term in case I sort of jumped off there for VR, AR, and MR. It gives a direct benefit to the worker when you're using the technology. There's been some initial studies. For example, the University of Maryland looked at the retention of information by people who are using virtual reality when they're trying to pick up information. Good retention marks. PwC did a study that found 275 people were 275% more confident in applying what they learned when they learned it through the benefit of XR. It also helps to create safer workspaces. So, for example, if you're a construction worker and you're able to go into an immersive reality through VR, and you can learn what some of the hazards are on the workplace and what some of the expectations are once you get there, it makes it a much more efficient and safer workspace. Really, when you're thinking about repeatable lifelike scenarios in sort of low stakes environments, we're seeing some tremendous results. I'll give just a few examples, not necessarily in the healthcare space, although if you think about EMTs or nurses that do have to do this type of training or how to interact with patients, I think that is very, very valuable. We saw Delta is using this technology for ramp operation personnel. They can do all of this in a virtual environment, and they don't have to take up the ramp space. They don't have to put themselves in a dangerous situation in order to learn, but they know what the process is for ramp operation. So Delta is embracing this. I find this one really kind of fun and interesting. Lockheed Martin is the prime contractor for the Orion space program, and they've partnered with Microsoft and the HoloLens to help their technicians as they're actually building the Orion spacecraft. So if you think about some of the very sort of repetitive measurement processes that have to take place to build this spacecraft, by using augmented reality or mixed reality and the hologram that overlays where a particular rivet or fastener needs to go, they've seen tremendous results. So, for example, they said that the work has gone 90% faster for these types of tasks, and that they've had zero reworks on what had to be administered. So the errors have diminished significantly. So this is really great. And I think also we saw, that it can help in many, many different environments. We did a caucus hearing with the Medical Technology Caucus, and we had some emergency doctors who talked about how to train in virtual reality in the time of COVID. They could kind of create that stress that we're all experiencing in these ER scenarios and prepare the staff so that they were able to better perform in the real world because they had this opportunity to train in a virtual environment. So there's all kinds of benefits, I think, to be had in using virtual and augmented reality for workforce training. One thing that I do want to point out is the ability to attract a more diverse talent pool. The Chamber Foundation actually has talked about opportunity nations, these sort of populations that have historically been underrepresented in workforce training, recruitment, and retention. And I wanted to just sort of draw a little bit on the accessibility population, because we've spent a little bit of time as an industry trade association. We created a best practices guide to help developers understand how to build more accessible experiences in virtual and augmented reality. And then we went and partnered with PETE, which is the Partnership for Employment and Accessible Technology. It's a program funded by the Department of Labor. And we did a white paper with them on the future of work. And I think where you start is there's a 2018 study by Accenture that pointed out that when you hire persons with disabilities, your economic output actually goes up, but they're historically under-hired. And so they are the epitome of this opportunity nation. So what if you have technology that allows, for example, voice commands, eye tracking, gesture control, which is what augmented and virtual reality enable an individual to do. And that overcomes some of the disabilities that they had that would have prevented them from doing a job. What if you have a tool that allows collaboration in an incredible way? For example, having real-time assist, where perhaps somebody who has the knowledge but some sort of disability is able to collaborate immediately with a person in the field fixing a wind turbine. They can get that real-time assist to do that job. And even just sort of the overlay of information. I mentioned earlier the Orion spacecraft example. When you are able to sort of physically see where the task at hand has to be completed, it makes it a lot easier. Maybe if you have some sort of cognitive disability, that all of a sudden you're now empowered. So I wanted to keep my remarks relatively short because I know we're getting towards the end of the day. And really what I'm here to talk about is this power of this type of technology, the way that AI will help make that even more engaging. And you can go through all kinds of interesting training scenarios, but we are seeing some tremendous uptake in the workforce for this type of technology rather than a disruptor. We believe this is actually an additive technology that will help the American workforce.
Super, Elizabeth, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Who's got our questions? I know you had a question. Jerry, you have not had a chance yet today. Go ahead.
Let me keep my finger down on it. All right, so here we go. The privacy, culturally, legally, regulatorily, and technology vis-a-vis artificial intelligence is a critically important intersection. We all know that because data is foundational to AI systems. And so how the US deals with the notion of individual rights vis-a-vis data about them and their environment is critically important, and whether or not the United States is going to be a leader or a follower in developing artificial intelligence. We have basically three different systems that are in competition now. We have the Europeans who have been able to find political consensus around the utilization of data with the GDPR. We have state governments trying to fill the void that Congress has absolutely been AWOL in, despite a lot of effort over the last couple of decades. And then we have China, where any data that the government wants, the government gets. And as we move forward into the future, I'd like to get some of your views about, the international competitive aspects of the importance of getting data rights right in the U.S.
And I would just ask you to keep your answers as tight as possible.
And it may take a book or two on this.
Well, I mean, I'll go and I'll try to be really quick, but I mean, you hit it on the head. We don't have a national standard, and we have to get to there. And if Congress isn't going to act on it, then we have to take the piecemeal approach, which I hate, quite frankly, because you have, California here on this end of the spectrum and Virginia on the other end of the spectrum. And in Ohio, we were trying to be kind of that just right bowl of porridge, that we were providing some consumer rights, but we were also providing some incentives and some carrots, some positive reinforcement for businesses to do the right thing and to implement those cybersecurity protections. And we still aren't there. And, we're getting hung up on the enforcement measures, primarily private right of action versus having the AG enforce it. But I think though that we need to have more and more states doing the piecemeal approach in order to reach some kind of a critical mass or some kind of a tipping point where at least we'll get a national standard or at least a model in place at a state level, then that can be adopted more broadly. That's my quick answer.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you're right. So for the U.S. to compete on the global stage, right, we may not win at the AI game, but we definitely want to be competitive. Data privacy has to be embedded into the value of what we're trying to do. And if it's not going to be government-led, it has to be industry-led. I mean, there's no probably other way around it. And getting to herd those cats is a different set of challenges. I get it. But there's enough large companies out there that are getting the data. The issue is data is gold. It's just gold right now. And everyone sees an opportunity to monetize it. And by putting restrictions around it, in some cases prohibits a business model or two from occurring. But from my vantage point, to kickstart it just may have to be industry-led.
Do we have a second quick question? Anyone who hasn't had a chance yet? Go ahead. Or have you had a chance? I'm trying to remember. No, go ahead then. Sorry, Al.
Thank you. So speaking of monetization and our theme today of do no harm, wonder what your thoughts are on how those intersect. So you mentioned VR, XR, something that may be in the interest of the consumer may also be detrimental to them long term if they become addicted to just existing in that space. So what are your thoughts on how to reconcile the profit incentive and the do no harm for the consumer?
I'll kick it off. I think we're always trying to figure out the equities, right? And I'll come back to the accessibility argument or example that I used. When it comes to privacy, for example, the forward-facing cameras on an augmented reality set of glasses afford somebody with low vision an opportunity to see in a way that they never have seen before. And so we need to understand that that's a positive, right? But obviously there's bystander data, there's all kinds of information. And so we have to try to iron out the equities of the positive and the maybe not so positive. But our organization overall is really trying to figure out the responsible development of the technology. And we're having similar conversations, I think, to the AI industry. We favor a federal approach to data privacy. We want to try to be very transparent about these equities and try to work through with all kinds of stakeholders. We just issued a report partnering with they issued the report, the Bipartisan Policy Center, but we partnered with them for 1.5 years to try to surface many of these opportunities, but also the challenges that are before us.
Okay, we are ready to get started. We have 3 panelists for this panel, 1 in person and 2 virtual. So we're going to start with Erin Henninger. Did I say that properly, Erin?
Close enough.
Erin is the panelist who's here in person, and we're going to get to our other 2 panelists virtually after she has her turn. Erin is the executive director of the Interactive Commons at Case Western University. that was established in 2014 as a center to connect individuals from across the university campus and its region through advanced visualization to further research and education. Erin, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Erin Henninger, and I am Executive Director of the Interactive Commons at Case Western Reserve University here in Cleveland. The Interactive Commons is really an innovation lab where we cultivate ways of thinking differently. We have a team of computer programmers, artists, instructional designers, and conveners who bring people together to solve problems and bring ideas to life. I'm going to structure my remarks today in 3 parts. First, a little background about what we're doing in relation to future of work, and then a couple of minutes to explore the opportunities and risks that we see in AI combined with other future tech, and some concluding remarks and requests for policy recommendations. So a little bit more about our lab, the Interactive Commons. One of our charges is to think about the future of education and what will make a student want to come to Case Western Reserve in 10, 20, 30 years from now. And if we're going to imagine the future of education, we have to think about what are the future jobs? What jobs are we preparing our students for, and what will society look like? And this directly relates to artificial intelligence, or as we often frame it, what jobs do humans do well, and what jobs will computers and robotics do better? So to predict this future, we try to think in decades. We often try to keep apprised of the emerging technology and consider how, when we combine these technologies, they will come together to affect society. So while this hearing is focused on the term artificial intelligence, we like to think of it as computer assistance. How can a computer's ability to process information be used to help us as humans in our work and our daily lives? So at the Interactive Commons, we've spent the most time thinking about the future of work related to mixed reality and the Microsoft HoloLens. And I promise I will get this back to AI. So I'm going to spend a moment just defining mixed reality in case you aren't familiar. Most people are a little more familiar with virtual reality, where we put on a headset device and it closes us off from the real world and immerses us in a virtual place. Mixed reality is a headset with a transparent visor that maps your environment and lets you see holograms in your world. You can see the room around you, the furniture, the people in that space, along with digital information. So mixed reality truly blends the real world with the digital world. It's mixing them together. So at the Interactive Commons, we got the opportunity to start programming for Microsoft HoloLens back in 2014 as Case Western Reserve was building our new medical school in collaboration with Cleveland Clinic. We had to make a decision about whether we would put the tradition of a cadaver dissection lab into that building or explore emerging technologies. So we decided to break from that 100+ year tradition of cadaver-based dissection and created a bespoke, in-house made holo anatomy curriculum. Today, 370 of our medical students are using and relying on mixed reality to learn their anatomical structures and the relationships to each other through a holographic human. They do this in groups of up to 50 students at a time. And in fact, our software networking enables the largest shared group experiences in HoloLens. So you can have multiple people seeing that same object. If you point at an object, I can see where you're pointing. And it's just a very natural way of communicating together. Even Microsoft isn't doing these large group shared experiences at that level. Our record is 100 devices in a shared group. Our work's been featured at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and today holoanatomy is licensed to 14 partners outside of Case Western Reserve Medical School. So all of that is to say that when we imagine the future of work, we picture a combination of multiple technology platforms. Specifically, we think a lot about mixed and virtual reality as well as AI. So the examples that I'm going to mention can be and likely will be enhanced with AI or computer assistance in the future, these examples of mixed reality. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about opportunities that we see. Certainly in education, I can speak to the effectiveness of the learning outcomes. We had to establish a platform of knowledge to say that HoloLens was an effective tool for education. So we did some of the earliest comparison trials where one student group would learn in the cadaver lab, another group would learn in HoloLens. They would take a test, and we found that the students would earn similar scores, but those who learned in HoloLens learned the material at least twice as fast. We then tested groups at the 8-month mark, which is a marker of learning retention. We found those that learned in HoloLens retained the information almost 50% better. An additional benefit that we discovered in mixed reality happened during the pandemic. We were able to ship 185 HoloLenses to our first-year medical students so that they never missed a day of instruction. We surveyed the students during this time and found that not only did they enjoy the tool, but 58% actually preferred remote holoanatomy to in-person class. And that was a little disappointing because we really believe in connecting humans at the same space. We're seeing similar outcomes in industry. The last panel covered some wonderful examples, so I'm going to skip through these, but Honeywell, Lockheed Martin, Chevron, all are using the unique abilities of HoloLens to enhance safety, to accelerate their training, and to improve skill retention. And there's multiple tools within the device that enable that. I also want to mention that we see HoloLens and AI combined as a means to provide virtual coaches or assistants. So in the absence of a human expert, can a person wearing a headset receive help or instruction on how to handle an unfamiliar situation? You could imagine a US Special Forces group providing better emergency care to an injured team member on the ground through AI supported by mixed reality. The other thing that we can consider is how do we assess learners through these technologies? People get test anxiety. Is there a more accurate way to measure what people are doing rather than writing an answer on a piece of paper? So imagine a better way to assess a surgeon in training, or how well a person performs a maintenance task, or even the act of teaching itself. So now that we've talked about some of the opportunities, I'm going to move on to some of the new risks facing the future of work related to AI and mixed reality or virtual reality. There are many, but I will focus on those related to privacy, identity, and ownership. So let's start by considering all of the privacy issues we have now. Now imagine wearing a headset that detects your environment through cameras in the device. It can track your movements, your head, your hands, and how you move around a space all of the time. So then you can bring in biometric data, such as eye tracking, to a device that you're wearing all day for work. Can someone make a medical diagnosis about you based on this tool? For example, the tech in today's head-mounted displays could flag to an employer that a staff member has a Parkinson's disease tremor, even before the employee himself could be aware of it. So what do we do with this information, and how do we prevent discrimination associated with that? And can we observe gender or racial bias based on how an employee is interacting with others as they're wearing that headset? Shifting gears a little in terms of privacy, when the content is digital, how do we determine what is private? When we wear these types of headsets, they're constantly mapping my room, the inside of my house, and my workplace. So who has the rights to that digital world? Or is this new level of digital footprint that I'm creating, who does that belong to? So do I have the right to my own digital wall in my own house, or the digital spaces I see when I walk around in the world? Can someone post a billboard or pop-up ad to my wall in my house, or every time I open my refrigerator? Can a person write hate speech on another person's wall? And there are examples of mixed reality being used in guerrilla art exhibits where they're augmenting art in a museum or in a public art kind of space. How do we opt out of these interactions? And do we get to opt out of seeing a traditional billboard today? So we're grappling with these in alternative medias, not just emerging media. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about how do we compensate individuals for the knowledge that they're imparting to the computer assistant or those who train the AI. So can we consider a royalty economy for those whose knowledge base are informing the AI and potentially making some workers obsolete? We also need to understand the risks and benefits of anonymity in the mixed reality space. We've seen that when users are unaccountable, it can lead to nefarious and even fraudulent activity in the form of internet trolls, fake user profiles, and fake product reviews. Furthermore, an algorithm that drives a certain result can isolate our frame of reference, and that is fundamentally bad for innovation. So I'm referring to how my Twitter feed is going to look different than your Twitter feed. My New York Times webpage will be different. Mine probably has more cat videos. So we have to be careful about who's designing AI. And going back to our innovation lab at Case Western, we're founded on a body of research that shows we get better results when we combine multiple perspectives: backgrounds, academic interests, ethnicities, genders, ages, and cultures. This diversity of perspectives is essential to creating holistic solutions that serve many. So let me summarize some of the opportunities and risks I mentioned and offer some final thoughts I'd recommend for policy. Like any technology, we can use AI as a weapon or a tool. Some of the opportunities that excite us about the future of work is this ability to combine AI with other tools like mixed and virtual reality to enhance education and learning retention, training that takes a novice to an expert faster, the ability to be helped by virtual coaches or assistants, and better methods to assess learners, especially high-stakes learners like surgeons in training. Some of the risks involve all of the usual issues of privacy, identity, and ownership in the digital space, with a bit of a new twist because the types of data our devices are detecting are from the interior of our homes or even biometric data. So some requests for policy. Let's ensure a variety of perspectives are being engaged to develop solutions. Let's respect individuals' privacy and ownership of their own data and knowledge bases. Let's consider the economic dignity of those affected by AI, especially as it's combined with virtual reality and mixed reality. There are multiple business models beyond the ad-based model that can benefit many stakeholders. Considering a royalty economy for those whose knowledge base or physical spaces are informing the AI and potentially making those workers obsolete or sacrificing the privacy of their own home environment. Let's also identify who is accountable for the full life cycle of what we create and how we deploy it in this future of work, from cradle to grave. In manufacturing, we know cradle to grave goes from sourcing materials to producing materials to recycling or disposing of materials. So in technology or with artificial intelligence, we need policy to make creators accountable for their AI from cradle to grave. What are the implications for users? Can we responsibly dispose of the AI if we find it isn't serving society? And what body will govern this? How do we make the benefits accessible to all? And how will we compensate for the negative impacts that we may not predict when we create it? Who is accountable? Thank you for this opportunity to share these thoughts, and I'll welcome your questions.
Erin, thank you very much. Is Alex Cotran on the line virtually?
I am.
Alex?
Can you guys hear me?
That you, Alex? Great. Alex Cotran is the CEO of the AI Education Project. Prior to that, he helped launch the Future Society, which is an AI governance think tank, which was spun out of the Harvard Kennedy School. Alex, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been I really concur with all the remarks that I've heard before. It's been a really good overview of, the myriad different issues that artificial intelligence is creating and requires action on. I'm going to focus specifically on AI literacy and what we're teaching our students in high school. So a little bit about AI EDU. So we're a nonprofit, and our mission is to inspire and excite students to explore artificial intelligence. And we want to equip students ultimately with the skills that they need to thrive as workers, creators, consumers, and citizens. So we were founded 3 years ago in 2019. We've reached 30,000 students in 9 states. Ohio is the first state that we launched in. I'm actually from Ohio. I went to Ohio State. My mom is a math teacher in Akron, Ohio, at Akron Early College High School. But we've grown to reach students all over the country, and our funders include the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, AT&T, Intel, NVIDIA, Booz Allen Hamilton, the J.M. Smucker Company based in Ohio, Google, and many others. And we've also been part of some of the leading accelerators for technology nonprofits, including AT&T Aspire and Fast Forward. And I share my bona fides just because, we're relatively new onto the scene, and really the work that we're doing is surprisingly, in many places, the first time schools have actually interacted with artificial intelligence. And one of the first projects that we did was actually a partnership with the Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technologies. And this is really to look at how are students learning about artificial intelligence today? Like, what are the methods or the opportunities available to students? And so this was a landscape analysis across the country that looked from K through 12 and beyond at what curriculum exists. And what we found is that most AI curricula that are out there are relegated to after-school programs and summer camps, and schools that have the resources to actually deliver technology education through the lens of computer science. And the challenge with that, as I think we've heard earlier today, is that computer science it's an imperfect delivery vehicle for learning about AI because many schools don't have computer science teachers whatsoever. And even schools that do have computer science teachers lack equitable access to those programs. So my mom teaches at Akron Public Schools, and APS, for example, has 10,000 students, and they have one computer science teacher for the entire district. So we're fundamentally under-resourced at the moment to teach students about what Google is calling the new electricity. I want to talk a bit about what this really means. So, when we say every single student in America needs to learn about artificial intelligence, the first thing I would say is, we're seeing the earliest forms of these tools, creeping out all around us. If anybody's seen the Boston Dynamics video of their Spot robot or the new John Deere autonomous tractor, or if you live in San Francisco like I do, you see self-driving cars all over the city. You can't go 1 or 2 blocks without seeing one. And then some of the really sophisticated deepfake technology and VR technology has been discussed. We're in the early days of these tools, and yet they're advancing at a rapid pace. And so it's hard sometimes to take, these individual instances of really advanced and interesting emerging tech and then understand how that's going to actually impact the economy as a whole. But I'll share a few things. So some quick stats. So the Oxford Martin School found that, in a study that 47% of US employment is at high risk of automation over the next decade or two. McKinsey did a similar study and found that about 50% of work activities are automatable. Now that's not jobs, that's work tasks. And the World Economic Forum said that by within the next several decades, AI is going to eliminate 75 million jobs. And there's a lot of disagreement about what this really means, and whether this means that the net number of jobs is going to disappear, or if there will be new jobs created. Oftentimes we ignore the problem by just assuming that, well, AI is going to dramatically increase productivity and create more jobs, and there'll be jobs that we can't even anticipate. Similar to the transition from the horse and carriage to cars. But it's not for certain that that's going to be the case. The nightmare scenario could be that, and what we're actually seeing now is that the forms of artificial intelligence that are being implemented, they're just barely good enough to replace human workers, but they're not actually significantly more productive. So they're cost effective, but they're not necessarily unlocking the levels of productivity that you would want to see to create wealth that could then be, let's say, redistributed or otherwise repurposed to new types of consumption. And that's reflected in productivity numbers. Productivity is not increased as much as people would expect given the pace of technology advancement. Another way to look at how artificial intelligence is going to impact the economy is to look backwards. So there was some work done by Darren Acemoglu and Pasquale Restrepo at MIT, who basically were looking at what the impacts of productivity, or how new technologies impact productivity. And essentially the issue is that between 1987 and 2017, the displacement effect of new technologies far outweighed their productivity effects. And so the computer revolution, so far, it's lacked the productivity impacts that previous industrial revolutions resulted in. And the US government, through the tax code, is actually giving companies extra encouragement to automate jobs, and it's taxing capital at a lower rate than labor. And that provides all sorts of incentives to purchase machines and software and equipment rather than hire people. Separately, and this is interesting, there was research done by Brad Hirschbein and Lisa Kahn that found that recessions are induce the most notable increases in routine task automation. And so this was especially evident after the Great Recession, but it can be traced back to prior recessions as well. And the takeaway is that we should anticipate that when the next recession comes, whenever it may come, it's going to spur another push for automation, this time leveraging significant advances in artificial intelligence since the last recession, which was over a decade ago. And automation is one of the principal reasons that we've seen the stratification of our labor force. And I can't share some slides, but if you look at a graph of earning potential in the US workforce, what you see is that between the 1970s and the early 2000s, there's been this stratification based on the level of education that you have. There was previously the ability to, obviously, if you were in manufacturing, you were able to get not just a living wage, but actually a middle class wage. As mechanized automation pushed those workers out of manufacturing, they were moved into service roles, which were harder to automate because they're non-routine tasks. And those jobs are, while they're harder to automate, they're also lower paid. And so you have this stratification where some people who are in the services industry, in consulting or legal services or in healthcare, are being very highly paid, but most people who are in services are actually being underpaid or low paid. And the issue now is that AI is increasingly putting those low-wage service jobs in the crosshairs. Many of the tools that are being rolled out now today, AI tools that companies can buy, they replace customer service agents, they replace sales agents, they replace food service workers. And while these technologies are still quite rudimentary, they're just good enough, as I said before, to displace people. And that's the nightmare scenario that we're going into. So we're in Ohio, and I would just say, if you look at the most common jobs in Ohio, the number 2 job is retail salespeople. And we've seen firsthand how those jobs have been displaced, not just by automation, by AI, but frankly by e-commerce and the internet, especially during the pandemic. The 3rd most common job is fast food and counter workers. The 4th most common job is cashiers. The 5th most common job is customer service representatives. And the list goes on. And when you look at that list, many of the most common jobs on that list are careers that are directly in the crosshairs of companies that are trying to automate and frankly displace workers. And so this brings us to students. So students need to learn about AI because they need to be making informed decisions about what they're going to do after high school. They need to know that there are certain technology-enabled careers that are high potential careers. There are also certain careers that, while they may not be technology careers, they're still resilient. For example, the most common job in the US is in Ohio rather, is registered nurses. And it's actually very hard to automate the work of a registered nurse. And so that's the reason why we need to be implementing AI literacy and AI education in high school, in large part to guide students towards these more resilient pathways. And so, some recommendations to close with, firstly, we just need clear standards around AI education at the state level. AIEDU has actually been advising the Ohio Department of Education on the rewrite of their computer science standards. And what ODE is doing and rolling out, I believe this fall, will be a new set of standards that includes AI education within the new computer science standards. We think more states should be following Ohio's lead, and we're really proud that Ohio is going to be setting a precedent at the national level to show how this can be done. But we also need federal dollars dedicated to supporting community efforts to pilot new education programs like the ones that AIEDU is providing to schools. And then we also need to rebrand the role of community college away from this fallback option and into something that can actually really empower workers who are trying to think about how they can blend technology learning within their existing set of interests. So I know that we've been going long, so I'm going to close now. But if anybody has any questions or would like to learn more about that curriculum, I'd be happy to follow up after the session. Thanks.
Alex, thank you very much. That's some fascinating stuff. A lot of good information there. Next and last on our panel is Almut Wakil Hassan. Are you there online?
Yes, I'm here. Do you hear me?
Great. Thank you for your patience. You are batting cleanup here on our program, and I'm warning my commissioners now, we are unfortunately not going to have time for questions on this panel, but we will be welcome to follow up with our panelists with questions afterwards. Go ahead.
Hello, members of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, AI Commission.
Forgive me. I'm sorry, I didn't actually properly introduce you, so I apologize for that.
I'll introduce
He's a student at Carnegie Mellon University.
Yeah.
That was quick. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Al Hassan, and I'm a student at Carnegie Mellon University, and I'm studying statistics and machine learning. And I would call myself a fledgling researcher in the field of AI and will be in the field for years to come. Professor Conrad Tucker on this commission is actually a professor of mine at Carnegie Mellon, and he teaches my Designing Better Human AI Futures class. And as such, I've talked with Professor Tucker about this topic often in the past. And he did mention that there's a lack of young people testifying to the commission. And we both agree that this could be problematic. So I hope my opinions may be of use, especially from the perspective of a student and young researcher. Firstly, I wanted to point out that the setting seems not really geared to younger people. As I mentioned earlier, I believe that there are underrepresented groups of people who are highly relevant to this discussion and which can have consequences not only for them, but everyone. I specifically ask that you also reach out to university students as well, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels, because these students are the future leaders of the field and will be the ones researching innovations for the technology in the future. I believe focus groups potentially in academic institutions with high AI research activity are especially helpful, as these institutions have a lot of influence over the field. And I feel that it is imperative that their input about how to best regulate the field while allowing their intellectual curiosity to flourish is heard. We also would not want to limit the areas of research on artificial intelligence. We believe that intelligence itself, either biological or artificially created, is neutral in nature, and only its applications are inherently good or bad. Therefore, we are against regulations being imposed against the research and development of AI systems. Rather, it is the deployment of these systems, especially for private sector usages, that should be regulated. On workforce issues, in history, new technology often displaced people and their occupations, but the population eventually learned to adapt, and society has benefited because of this. So I believe the automation, many tasks, will lead to tangible long-term improvements in society, but the caveat is that short-term effects of these systems can be bad for the average person if the effects are not properly mitigated. Automation is certain to improve the GDP over time, and it's very likely that AI systems would help society as a whole by increasing our productivity, but we must be mindful of where the gain from these systems go. The wealth gap in the country has been increasing, and mass deployment of AI systems will almost certainly widen the gap between the most wealthy and the median American if steps aren't taken to prevent it. This is especially true because of potential jobs lost in the short term for lower income Americans. But we can hope that the people shift to higher skilled occupations as lower ones become automated. But in the end, we should ensure that the economic gain of these systems is universal. We have seen the average productivity and output of workers rise over the past few decades, similar to statistics that Alex Cochran has shared. And we must ask ourselves if, as a society, we want AI automation to be framed as a way to replace people's jobs, to drive profit margins, or if we want AI automation to be framed as a way to improve working conditions and quality of life for people. In highly skilled fields such as medicine, AI systems are being used to lighten the burden on doctors, which is a gain for everyone. And I hope that as low-skilled jobs become more automated, that people will be able to move towards more skilled positions. If this is gradual, then it may be a natural transition in the economy. However, I ask that you closely monitor the situation and the lives of the people who are affected by this automation. If economic conditions become burdensome for those displaced people, it may be necessary to consider measures like tax on new automations that cause these worker displacements. A tax like this could serve to both correct the rate turnovers, and it could also create a fund that directly serve those people affected. It could be used to help the training of people for more skilled positions, for more economic mobility, or to mitigate the temporary impact on families during these transition periods. This was short, but that concludes the list of topics I wanted to talk about. So thank you for listening and for having me here.
Al, thank you very much. My apologies. However, I did not pronounce your name properly, but that was a tough one for me. But very much appreciate you being here, and certainly appreciate Professor Tucker for encouraging you to do that. We're delighted that you were able to participate with us. And I want to thank you, Al, and Alex, and Aaron, our fourth panelists, and our apologies that we don't have time built in here at the end to ask you questions, but I would ask if you are willing If our commissioners have questions, follow-up questions for you, we can submit them to you. And if you are able, we would love to hear your responses to some of the questions that our commissioners have, as well as we continue to do our research and gather information. I want to thank all of our commissioners for being here today. Our next hearing will be in Palo Alto in a couple of weeks, I think it is. Look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks again to the Chamber of Commerce for helping us continue along on this path. This is very exciting, and today was amazing, hearing from a lot of really worthwhile experts as we're continuing down this path of gathering information. So thank you all very much.